Chapter 528. Thinking of this, Su Yusong's heart started beating wildly. Among the three options, Art St. Chin Zhao has come back to life, the elders are extremely scheming, and Li Yunxin faked his death and went to Cloud Mountain. The third option was undoubtedly the most acceptable. However, this was just speculation. Rather than saying that the third speculation was the most likely, it was more accurate to say that they hoped that it was the most likely. That way, at least they wouldn't have to face Qin Zhao and the elders with terrifying power. It would only be a few dozen hours. The two wandering souls had previously controlled the Xianmen and the world, but now they were practically alone. There was a world of difference between the days outside Cloud Mountain and the days inside Cloud Mountain. This terrifying reality made them want to believe that there was a third party. That way, at least the familiar Cloud Mountain would still be there. But thinking about it, the two wandering souls weren't ostriches who liked to bury their heads in the sand. This speculation had to be verified. Thus, Su Yusong exhaled softly and composed himself. He turned his face slightly and said to a wandering soul behind him, "Go back to Cloud Mountain and take a look. Just walk around the mountain and see if there's any movement. Go check the Pill Cauldron Sect's mountain gate and see if Gui Yuanzi is still alive." Zhuomuxia interrupted him and pointed to another wandering soul. "You two go together. If it really is Li Yunxin, Gui Yuanzi once ambushed him on Mount Jun. With his hatred and vengeance, he'll definitely find trouble with Gui Yuanzi." Su Yusong frowned. But he didn't say anything. The two wandering souls immediately accepted the order without any objections. Although these wandering souls were arrogant and unruly when they were outside, they seemed to be completely submissive to the two fake saints and followed their lead. When they were about to leave, they said in a low voice, "Senior brother and senior sister," but as he said this, he looked into the distance. He was talking about the cultivators who had survived. The two wandering souls selected by Su Yusong and Zhuomuxia were the sect masters of the two sections. Coincidentally, some of their disciples who didn't know the inside story were also among the survivors. Although it was a possession, it had interacted with these cultivators for hundreds of years. Now that he was looking at her from afar, he really didn't know what he was thinking. After he said this, a young man in a purple robe suddenly stepped out of the crowd among the surviving cultivators. He took 3 steps forward, knelt on the ground and cried out in pain, "Master! What did I do wrong?" This group of people had bloodstains on their bodies, and many of them had light or heavy injuries. There was no lack of true realm cultivators among them, and there was even a profound realm cultivator among them. But they were all gathered in the depths of the crowd, discussing something. Only those with low cultivation bases couldn't make any decisions, nor did they dare to disperse. They could only watch with great worry, not knowing what to do. Now the young man seemed to have seen his master, the wandering soul who had spoken. His mind was stirred and he could not hold it in any longer. As he knelt, many of his fellow cultivators also knelt down. A group of people covered in blood and injuries came to ask Master, "What did we do wrong?" in a sorrowful and heartbroken manner. The scene was even more unbearable to watch. But it wasn't just the people of this sect who had survived. There were also people from other sections. Originally they were still hesitant and vigilant, but when they saw this scene, the shouts and cries of pain seemed to be contagious, causing the rest of the people to kneel as well. Of course, there were some who had seen the inside story and couldn't ease the hatred in their hearts. They stood upright and glared angrily. But now, among the more than 1,000 cultivators, hundreds had knelt down. Their cries of blame soared into the sky, like cuckoo weeping blood. It seemed even more deafening than the previous battle cries. The two wandering souls had originally turned to leave. But when they saw this scene they couldn't move for a while. The wandering souls' realms were also high, but they weren't real cultivators after all. They also had many desires. These emotions included temperamental, ruthless, ungrateful, and naturally there were other positive and beautiful emotions as well. If there was only darkness in a person's heart and not even the slightest bit of light, then this person would not become someone who listened to Su Yusong and Zhuomu. He should become someone more terrifying than his senior brother and senior sister. Therefore, even these wandering souls who usually killed and possessed people without blinking, were stunned for a moment. Su Yusong and Zhuomuxia had been false saints for 1,000 years, and they wanted to truly unify the celestial sect and regard the world as their private property. How could these wandering souls not have similar thoughts? The cultivators cried in pain, but the wandering souls were silent for a while. Until another person emerged from the prostrating crowd. The wandering souls might not be familiar with the disciples of the sect, but this person was familiar. It was Ku Chanzi. This Kuchanzi was originally appointed as the commander of the Black Tower at the front line. But the Black Tower was broken, and he retreated with the remaining troops. Demons broke through several lines of defense one after another, but he remained in the battle formation. He wasn't greedy for life and afraid of death, but fought bravely and didn't die. Then 2 wandering souls came out of the mountain. Kuchanzi and the other cultivators who hadn't been possessed realized that the false saints were suspicious, and he was the first to attack. As a result, some of those high-level cultivators left and some died, but Kuchanzi still didn't die. And now, after the previous fierce battle and the baptism of the rain of fire, he still didn't die. His luck was probably the best among this group of survivors. His cultivation was also the highest among this group of people. Now that he walked out of the crowd, the sorrowful cries were much quieter. This mysterious Shi cultivator, the new sect leader of the Langya cave abode, first glanced at these wandering souls. In front of him were more than 30 sect leaders and sect leaders who had been possessed by wandering souls. Some of them even used to be on good terms with him. But how could he have imagined that the situation would be like this now? He let out a sigh of relief and looked at Su Yusong. "Who are you?" Su Yusong turned his face and shouted at the 2 wandering souls in a low voice, "What are you waiting for? Go quickly. These people can't make any big waves." Then he looked at Kuchanzi. After a pause he said calmly, "It's meaningless to talk about this now. Now that the celestial sect has been overturned, a new era is coming. Kuchanzi, although you're not one of us, you did do something for me in the past. Now that you're not dead, it's also fate. Don't die in vain. Come to my seat. The old celestial sect is gone, but there might be a new one." After he said this, the crying stopped. Those low-level cultivators were originally crying and sorrowful because they felt that they had been used as pawns and sacrificed by their master and senior, whom they had once respected. Their vision was limited, so it was difficult for them to think of a more terrible possibility. Even if they had some conjectures in their minds, it was difficult to take them seriously. However, after hearing Su Yusong's words, they had to believe it even if they didn't want to. So they looked at each other dumbfounded, hoping that they had heard wrong. However, it was indeed true. Kuchanzi's expression also changed. Although he had always known about this was the first time he had confirmed it from the mouth of the sage. Although he was less surprised than those low-level cultivators, it still made this mysterious realm Taoist, who had cultivated to the point of being emotionless, speechless. After 3 breaths, seeing that Su Yusong was about to speak again, he suddenly raised his hand and shouted in a low voice, "No need." He looked at Su Yusong and said, "It turns out that the evil path has seized the celestial sect's tens of thousands of years of foundation. It's ridiculous that as a mysterious realm cultivator, I boast that I can pry into the secrets of heaven, but I still don't know. Forget it. Maybe because of this, because the evil path is in collusion with the demons in the human world, the celestial beings hate this world and no longer issue decrees. It's also my fate is exhausted." Zhuamuxia chuckled and said, "Celestial beings? You think?" But Kuchanzi immediately shouted, "Don't be so arrogant, demon. How dare you talk about the celestial beings?" Zhuamuxia was stunned, but he didn't get angry. He seemed to understand something, so he just smiled disdainfully and didn't speak. Su Yusong stared at him silently for a while and said in a deep voice, "So what do you want?" 2 false saints, plus the sect master and the sect leader who had been possessed by the wandering souls, there were a total of 35 people. Except for the false saints, 9 of them were in the mysterious realm, and the remaining 24 were in the true realm. If it were in the secular Jianghu, 35 top masters would not be able to defeat thousands of farmers. However, in the Jianghu, cultivators could sprinkle fire and thunder with a wave of their hands. Their amazing destructive power and attack power were by no means comparable to the martial arts of the Jianghu. Therefore, these wandering souls were not afraid of thousands of low-level cultivators. It was to the extent that, if a conflict really broke out, these 35 people would be able to completely annihilate those people within 2 hours if they didn't care about the consequences. The only ones who could escape were probably the true realm and Kuchanzi, who was in the mysterious realm. However, at this time, Su Yusong didn't want to cause more trouble. The situation in the Cloud Mountain was unknown, and there were demons waiting for them. It would be best if all the Dragon Sons died. If they didn't die, they would be in a mess if they took advantage of the chaos to attack. Kuchanzi looked at these wandering souls for a while and said in a deep voice, "I should have led these people to kill you. But enough people have died today. The rest are the only profound orthodox sects left in this world, and I don't want them to die here in vain. Speaking of this, he looked up at the huge cloud mountain, which had now occupied the entire sky and seemed to have become the background of the world. When it was moving in the sky, it was difficult for people to have an intuitive sense of its size. But now that it had landed on the ground, it had become an unimaginable giant. Even the tall mountains nearby had turned into low hills due to its contrast. Even if he looked up, he couldn't see the top because the top was towering in the clouds. Then, the profound realm cultivator withdrew his gaze and said, "I want to take them away from here. Although these people's lives are meaningless to you, they are different to me. If you want to stop me, I, Kuchanzi, will kill one of you even if I have to die. If you think it's worth it, then come and stop me." After saying this, he ignored the wandering souls. He turned around and said to the helpless cultivators, "Pay your respects to the cloud mountain again. If you want to go, come with me." The wandering souls didn't say anything. Kuchanzi had seen through their thoughts. These thousands of people were the only cultivators left in the world, and these 35 people were also the only wandering souls left in the world. Without the protection of the profound gate, every sacrifice would be a huge loss. Because in the future, it would be very difficult to find a suitable cultivator to possess. Therefore, Su Yusong and Zhuamuja silently watched the thousands of people kneel on the ground one after another, and then silently kowtow to the cloud mountain like undulating waves. For most people, this would be the last time they would see the cloud mountain. Those who were seriously injured would soon die, and those who failed to cultivate would also die very soon. In the future, without the rich spiritual qi in the cloud mountain, without the medicinal pills, treasures and ancient books in the sect, their cultivation would be even more difficult. Perhaps most of the heavenly heart technique would also be lost. It was really the end of their luck. Seeing this scene, the two people pointed out by Su Yusong sighed and flew straight to the cloud mountain. Zhuamuja still wanted to say something, but Su Yusong patted his hand and said, "Let them go." He stared gloomily at the cultivators who got up and left without any reluctance. At this time they were more like refugees than cultivators. "There are tens of thousands of demons on three sides," he said in a low voice. "They retreated just now because they were scared. But if Long Sun is still here, the demons in the forest will soon be organized. At that time there will be less than 10 of them left and we don't have to do anything." Kuchanzi must understand this, so he dared to say those words. Let him build up his momentum first. After saying this, he turned to look at the cloud mountain. "I hope we," but before he could finish his words, he suddenly frowned. Looking at the cloud mountain from where they were, it seemed to be close at hand. The huge mountain was pressing down as if they were under the eaves. But as the saying goes, looking at the mountain runs to death. With the size of the cloud mountain, it wouldn't look too small even if it was seen from 100 miles away. In fact, there was some distance between these wandering souls and the cloud mountain. He had asked the two people to investigate the situation inside the cloud mountain, and they immediately fled. Both of them were in the true state, and now they knew that the situation was urgent, so they naturally did their best. Therefore, although only a dozen breaths had passed, their figures had already disappeared at the end of the horizon. But when Su Yusong was halfway through his words, at the end of the horizon where the two people had disappeared, suddenly, a bright, dazzling light burst out. Closely following this dazzling light was a huge phantom, and a clear and long cry that cut through the sky. That phantom was at least 100 feet tall, and at a rough glance, it looked like a big white bird. However, its white body was covered with dense golden spots, which shone brightly. There was also a flaming crown on his head, looking like a beautiful fan that had been opened. The phantom of the giant bird flipped and turned in the air, as if it was fighting with someone. Because of this, its tail feathers were also revealed. They were golden and bright white intertwined, as if it was a suit of silk clothing pouring down in torrents. This huge bird looked like a peacock, but its tail feathers weren't like a male peacock's fan tail, but more like tassels. Its cry sounded like a crane's cry, but it was even sharper and louder. Everyone's expression changed. Just by looking at this phantom, the true body of the phantom was probably at the profound realm. However, the surprise only lasted for a moment. The phantom also flashed and disappeared. After 2 breaths, silence returned and Zhuamuja shouted in a low voice, "You two go and have a look." Without needing her order, the 2 profound realm wandering souls had already pounced on it. Similarly, it didn't take long, the 2 people came back with 2 more people. In fact, they weren't people but 2 whirling balls of wind. They were the true bodies of the wandering souls. They looked like they had suffered a fatal injury. Because the method of refining the wandering souls was very special, it was difficult to destroy them without the 9 heavens thunderfire, so they survived. But, 2 breaths? Even if the true realm possessed by the wandering souls was much weaker than the real true realm cultivators, it was still the true realm. He was killed just like that. Just now, Su Yusong was worried that these people might be injured, so he let the low-level cultivators go. Because of this, his expression was extremely unsightly and he immediately asked, "Who is it? Who is it? Is it Li Yunxin?" The two wandering souls spun, unable to say a complete sentence for a long time. The wandering soul who went to rescue them said, "When we arrived they were already gone, they seemed to have been ambushed, but their bodies were indeed shattered by one palm. This kind of strength is from a demon." At this time, the two remnant souls finally connected their words into a sentence. "It's Bai Yunxin. That demon called himself Bai Yunxin." Chapter 529. Su Yusong and Zhuomuxia looked at each other and saw the surprise in each other's eyes. Maybe there was a trace of fear. Because Bai Yunxin and Red Madam had been captured by them under Ku Chanzi's orders and imprisoned in Cloud Mountain. Both Su Yusong and Zhuomuxia knew Bai Yunxin. This female monster of the real realm had been walking in the world for thousands of years, but no one really caught her because of her adoptive father, the Golden Rock King. Although the Golden Rock King was sealed, he was still a great monster in the Grand Supreme Realm, and his adopted daughter couldn't be touched. There was another reason. Bai Yunxin often came to Yunshan to make trouble. The other demons avoided Yunshan like the plague, but Bai Yunxin was different. It was because her feather robe was originally in Yunshan. It was said that a Taoist priest surnamed Nyo stole her feather robe 1,000 years ago, so she could not return to the place where the Golden Rock King was sealed. She often went to ask for it back, but to no avail. As for who the Taoist priest was and why he stole it, few people in the world knew. But Su Yusong and Zhuomuxia always knew that Bai Yunxin was called the Crane Monster in the real realm. But this was not her real realm. Today they finally saw it with their own eyes and realized that her real body was not the Crane Monster, but a red flame-white phoenix. This meant, she found her feather robe and returned to her peak state, the mysterious realm. Bai Yunxin's feather robe was originally taken out of Yunshan and fell into the hands of Dongting and Lord Dongting. Later they also learned that Bai Yunxin kidnapped Red Lady, but there was no other news, which meant that the feather robe was not with Red Lady. Therefore they were relieved to bring them back to Yunshan. Thinking of this, Su Yusong couldn't help but whisper, "Did Ku Chanzi use some tricks when he caught them? He deliberately sent them to Yunshan? Then was it her who touched the restriction of Shaoyin Mountain before?" For a moment, this was the most reasonable explanation he could think of. But Zhuomuxia immediately shook his head. It should be the power of the Grand Supreme Realm that touched the restriction. The mysterious realm can't do it. I think he was released by someone. We were wrong about that. It's not Li Yunxin. She looked up at Yunshan Mountain. It's him. Su Yusong was slightly stunned. He knew who she was talking about. The he and she mentioned by the wandering souls naturally referred to the Sage of Calligrapher and the Sage of Sword whose names had been stolen by them. Someone must have helped Bai Yunxin. Furthermore, the person who helped her was at the Grand Supreme Realm. Other than Su Sheng, who had his consciousness erased and was trapped in the floating mountain, they couldn't think of a second person. But the reincarnation body of the Master of Calligrapher. Was his mind really erased? If the reincarnation of the Master of Calligrapher was really resurrected in the empty floating mountain, then what was that rain of fire just now? Could it be that the Sage of Calligrapher had made peace with the elders? How absurd. There was too much information, too many possibilities, and too little time, compared to their days in the Cloud Mountains. Su Yusong once again felt a headache and helplessness. Perhaps he had the ability to grasp the key points and make decisions quickly in the midst of a multitude of things. However, it had been obliterated by the long period of time in the Cloudy Mountain. Thus, he immediately reached into his sleeve and pinched a talisman. He drew a few lines on the talisman with his finger, and the talisman immediately burst into flames. After waiting for a dozen breaths, he looked up at Zhuomuxia. Master D did not respond. In that case, we can't delay any longer. I'll stay here to prevent the demons from coming again. You lead the people back to the Cloudy Mountain. If Master D asks, just say it's an emergency, Zhuomuxia whispered, if they're still here. Su Yusong nodded. Then he looked at her and was silent for a while before saying, be careful. Zhuomuxia was stunned by these 3 words. Then he nodded, turned around, and left. When they were still on the Cloudy Mountain, the two probably didn't expect that one day they would be reminded like this. Because for the 2 wandering souls, the situation at the moment was indeed unpredictable. It was just that, they had left the little Cloud Mountain for dozens of hours. The whole world seemed to have suddenly become strange. The surviving cultivators who had left the cloudy mountain felt that they had lost their shelter overnight, and now the two fake sages seemed to have the same feeling. In fact, what they were most worried about was not the appearance of any enemy in the cloudy mountain, whether the enemy was Li Yunxin or the reincarnation of the master of calligrapher. What they were most worried about was the wandering souls had been tricked by the elders just like they had tricked those cultivators. When Wuxia and the four mysterious realm and the four wandering souls of the true realm also disappeared in the distance, Su Yusong let out a sigh of relief. He flicked his sleeves, about to put the two incomplete wandering souls into his sleeves. He and Wuxia were wearing human skins, so they had the magical power to store all things. Xan Shilio didn't listen to him, so he temporarily put her into his sleeves. Lu Ling was seriously injured and almost dead, so he temporarily put her into his sleeves. Now he also planned to keep the two remnant souls. After returning to the cloudy mountain and refining them for a period of time, he would probably be able to save them. The two remnant souls who had been destroyed by Yunxin spun in circles after saying such a clear sentence, as if that sentence had consumed a lot of their strength. At this time, they seemed to have gathered enough strength again. When Su Yusong raised his hand, they said again, "When we just met, I saw a white figure. I suspected that it was Li Yunxin." It hadn't been a long time since they said that sentence. The two wandering souls had thought about the matter of Yunxin regaining the feather robe for a long time, and then made a decision. It had only been a dozen breaths of time. Unexpectedly, they hadn't finished speaking, and were gathering strength to speak slowly. But no matter what, Su Yusong decided to temporarily wait and see, so he said, "This isn't your fault. You don't have to," but the remnant soul interrupted him, still saying, "I just asked, is Li Yun Xen?" At this point, Su Yusong's heart skipped a beat. He put down his hand and frowned, and then? The wandering soul gathered strength for a while, then said, "That female monster said, blind dog eyes, to find Li Yunxin, to go to the cloudy mountain. He might be having fun with the salted fish." After saying that, she regretted it. That's why Su Yusong's face turned cold and he shouted in a low voice, "Did you hear it correctly?" But he was anxious now and the remnant soul couldn't speak. After spinning for a while, it swayed left and right, like a gust of wind that was about to dissipate. This was because its spiritual energy was almost exhausted, and it couldn't speak anymore. His words were heard by the other wandering souls. For a moment their expressions changed. In fact, these people didn't take Li Yunxin seriously at first. But when they saw how afraid their senior brothers and sisters were of this person, they knew that he was a difficult character to deal with. But now that they heard this, Su Yusong's face turned livid. He really didn't die. He took another step forward. So, the reincarnation was also part of their plan. No matter what reason he had for making such a guess, he was right this time. Thinking of this, he immediately raised his hand and shouted, "All of you go back with me." But just as he finished speaking, a familiar scene appeared again. On the distant horizon, a dazzling light suddenly burst out. Previously, when Yunxin killed the two true realm wandering souls, the light was incomparably magnificent. At a glance, it could be seen that only a profound realm cultivator could have such a momentum. But now, such a light burst out again, and it was even more brilliant than when Yunxin attacked. It was as if a blazing sun had risen from the horizon, almost illuminating half of Cloud Mountain. In just 2 breaths' time, an astonishing gust of wind howled with astonishing warmth. Everything along the way, whether it was trees, withered grass, or rocks, was turned into powder in the wind, in just an instant. Then a huge mushroom cloud rose up, there were thick flames rolling in it, mystic lights flashing, and electric snakes swimming violently. This terrifying power, it must be the Grand Supreme Realm. Wuxia was fighting with someone. When he saw Yunxin appear, Su Yusong was surprised. But now, seeing this even bigger scene, he was pleasantly surprised. This meant that Wuxia had found Li Yunxin and caught him red-handed. The gust of wind that turned the boulders into powder was nothing to this group of people. The group of people immediately shot against the wind and went straight to the place of the battle. But just as they were about to set off, they saw another flash of light. It was an indescribable flash. It was as if 100 suns had burst out from that huge rolling cloud of fire. The whole world was illuminated, and even the darkest corner could be seen. Then, along with the terrible roar that could almost shake people to death, came the billowing waves of magma. The previous explosion had set off a shockwave like dust mist. But this time it set off soil and rocks that were dozens of feet deep. In front of the terrible power, the soil and rocks turned into liquid like water, and in the blink of an eye was melted into magma by the extremely high temperature. In an instant, the originally flat and solid ground turned into the sea of magma that Li Yunxin had seen in the narrow room. Su Yusong was sure that the previous attack was made by Zhuomuxia, because he could sense the familiar aura and spiritual power. But now this attack, this unimaginably violent power and the flow of completely unfamiliar aura, who was it? This was clearly several times stronger than Zhuomuxia's. It was almost as if they had put on their skin and flesh at the same time. The surprise in his heart turned into fear at this moment. This level of power, even Zhuomuxia might not be able to deal with it. And the 8 people she had brought, if they were 8 decent cultivators from the Shenmen sect who had studied magic, they might have a chance to survive. But they were 8 wandering souls. Although they were strong, they were not flexible enough. If they were to encounter such an overwhelming and violent attack, they might lose their bodies. Su Yusong was shocked, but he did not lose his mind. He shouted, telling the remaining wandering souls to hide far away, and then he rushed against the terrible waves of fire alone. Before this, he had already lost 2. Now he had lost 8 more, and the total of 10 remnant souls would probably have to be refined again. But today it seemed that their fate was really going to end. The more he feared, the more it would come. Previously, the 2 wandering souls could escape from Bai Yunxin's hands because only the 9 heavens thunder fire could disperse them. But just when Su Yusong had this thought, amidst the earth-shattering waves of fire, amidst the seemingly solid fiery clouds, a continuous series of explosions suddenly rang out. The bright white, bucket-thick lightning bolts struck down from the clouds, densely packed, like a forest suddenly growing out of a sea of fire. If it was not the dragon's 9 heavens thunder fire, what else could it be? Su Yusong's hatred was about to burst. For a moment, he felt all his blood rushing to the top of his head, his ears buzzing, and a ball of fire seemed to explode in his body. With such a powerful thunder fire, not to mention the 8 wandering souls, even Zhuomuxia might lose his life. Now that things had come to this, how could he have the mood to think about the inside story, conspiracy, and overall situation? In his mind there was only Zhuomuxia. When the countless lightning bolts struck down, Zhuomuxia's aura suddenly became extremely weak and scattered, as if he didn't even dare to think about it anymore. He flew straight up and let out a muffled thunderous roar. At the same time, afraid that the other party wouldn't see him, he also showed his golden body that was hundreds of meters tall. Li Yunxin. If you dare to kill her, I'll destroy your soul. You, don't kill her. He used all his strength and rushed to the battlefield in an instant. The golden body waved its arms and immediately tore the wall-like fire cloud apart. Then, a colorful restriction appeared in front of it, blocking all the lightning bolts that were coming at him. But it only stopped them for a moment. The restriction was immediately shattered, but Su Yusong's body shook, and he used his spiritual power to create another layer. In just 2 to 3 breaths of time, the mysterious light on the golden body had turned into a vast expanse. It was unknown how many layers had been destroyed. Once the fire cloud was dispersed by him, it revealed a terrifyingly deep pit underneath. The pit was filled with lava, emitting an astonishing amount of heat. It was like a lake. At this time, the aura of the 8 wandering souls that came with Zhuomuxia had completely dissipated. Zhuomuxia's aura was still there, but it was very weak. Su Yusong ran wildly on the lava lake for a while before he finally caught a very faint trace of it, in front of him. After dispersing a large area of fire cloud, lightning and dust, he finally saw a figure in the fire fog in front of him. In the figure's palm was a golden, round light. Wasn't it Zhuomuxia's divine soul? The divine soul that had lost all its spiritual power and only had consciousness and memories left. Seeing that the person was about to crush the divine soul, Su Yusong immediately shouted, Li Yunxin, if you dare to disperse her, I'll chase you to the ends of the earth until you die. He shouted fiercely, but he didn't dare to move forward anymore. He stopped. Now that there was a thick fire fog between him and the person, he could only see the figure's shadow, and he couldn't see the person's face clearly. The 2 of them were surrounded by thick fiery clouds that were swirling and rising into the sky. It was as if the whole world was burning, and the 3 of them were the only survivors. Hearing his shout, the figure's fingers loosened. No one knew what he was thinking. After a while, the person sneered and said, "Oh? Do people like you even know what love is?" Su Yusong was stunned. It wasn't Li Yunxin's voice that he expected. It was a woman's voice. For a moment he almost thought it was Qin Zhao. But he soon realized that the voice didn't belong to her. He had heard this voice before and it was familiar. It was The figure suddenly waved her hand, dispersing the fire fog in front of her. It was Red Lady. Since you also understand love, I'll see how much you understand. Now Red Lady, who had a pair of bright horns on her forehead and fine golden scales on her cheeks, narrowed her long and narrow eyes and stared at Su Yusong. Kill yourself immediately. I'll let her live. Are you willing? Chapter 530. Su Yusong was only stunned for a moment. At this moment he was thinking about how Red Lady got out of trouble, how she became so strong, and where was Li Yunxin. But these things only appeared in his mind for a moment, and he immediately dismissed them. Now he couldn't think about these things anymore. All his thoughts were focused on the golden light in Red Lady's palm. In fact, the hesitation only lasted for a moment. The next moment, the wandering soul of the Freemasonry suddenly raised his hand and hit his forehead with a buzz. Probably no one would have thought of this move. Red Lady only had time to show a hint of surprise in her eyes before the hand hit her forehead. With a bang, it was as if a huge cannon had been fired at Su Yusong's body. The strong wind brought about by the palm instantly blasted out a series of ripples in the sea of lava behind him. Even the ground behind him was blasted into a deep pit. Such a strong palm force directly shattered Su Yusong's forehead. It was shattered. His body was like a piece of porcelain. Now that he had struck his forehead with his palm, a crack slowly appeared on his forehead. After a while, the crack rapidly expanded, extending from his forehead down through the bridge of his nose, lips, neck and all the way to his torso. The cracks split into many fine lines and spread to other parts of the body. In just a breath's time, Su Yusong's whole body was covered with cracks, as if he had been smashed and had just been glued back together. Then he said, "Good. Now you let her go." Originally, his lips were tightly pursed. But at this time, as soon as he spoke, the skin immediately collapsed and scattered on the ground, and turned into dust in the blink of an eye. Along with the skin fell some fragmented magic treasures, which might have been kept in the skin before. There were also two charmingly naive dolls, which should be the people he had kept in his sleeve before. But Red Lady didn't look at these things. At first there was surprise in her eyes, but now there was an inexplicable and strange light in them. It was as if she had seen some magical animal for the first time. She carefully looked at Su Yusong again and then clicked her tongue twice. Holding the ball of golden light in one hand, she walked around Su Yusong. "So, you don't know how to feel bad for something that's not yours after all? I heard that your skin belongs to a saint. Will it be destroyed just like that?" At this moment, Su Yusong's remnant soul appeared. It was a hazy humanoid figure that floated in the air. Just by looking at its appearance, it was no different from an ordinary wandering ghost. The human body was used to protect the soul. It was like the shell of a shellfish. Now he actually smashed the skin of the Grand Supreme Saint with a single palm strike, exposing the most fragile part of his soul. If Red Lady wanted to, as long as she summoned the ninth heaven thunder fire, it would be difficult for him to escape death. The wandering soul only said, "I'm in your hands. Let her go." Red Madam stopped in front of him. Suddenly the expression on his face disappeared, and he stared at him expressionlessly for a while before saying, "The two of you have done many bad things. My Lord Father and I parted ways, and my Lord Father's death might also be part of your sins. In the end, he didn't want to live anymore. He's really loyal to his friends." After she said this, the wandering soul fell silent and didn't reply to her. So Red Lady suddenly raised her eyebrows and shouted sternly, "I ask you why?" The wandering soul looked at her blankly as if he didn't know what she meant. "I ask you why you're willing to die for her." Red Lady glared at him angrily, her pupils narrowed into thin lines, looking beautiful and ferocious. "Aren't you evil people? Aren't you people who have killed countless people? Why are you putting on a show of affection in front of me now? Why don't you run away?" Her tone of speaking before was like a cat playing with a mouse in the palm of her hand. But at this time the playfulness was all gone, and it was replaced by a burst of anger that came out of nowhere. Every time she shouted a question, the wandering soul's body flickered with the overflowing murderous aura and aura. Even the thick fire clouds that wrapped around them and spun straight up into the sky swayed. Hearing her question, the wandering soul blinked blankly. It was impossible to see the expression on his blurry face, but he still looked at her as if he didn't know how to answer. After a while he murmured, "What? What?" Red Lady took a step forward and moved closer to him. The pair of bright horns on her forehead almost touched Su Yusong's forehead. So the wandering soul's face revealed a painful expression. His body was like a piece of ice and Red Lady's horns were like red-hot iron. As soon as she got closer, the wandering soul's forehead fluctuated as if his body was about to melt. But the wandering soul didn't move, as if he was absent-minded. Red Lady glared at him angrily. Yes, why? The two of you must have wanted to do something big after plotting for so long. You must have been willing to sacrifice and deceive anyone to protect yourself. But now, she gritted her teeth and said, because I wanted to kill her, you broke your own skin. If I used more strength, she would have died and you would have died too. Why would people like you do such a stupid thing now? Why are you willing to die for her? You're so stupid. She shouted a few more times, and Su Yusong finally seemed to come back to his senses. His body shook and he took a step back. Don't know why. Then he sighed. It's because of obsession. Hearing this, the expression on Red Lady's face also froze for a while. Then, she suddenly let out a sigh of relief and all her anger disappeared. It was as if a basin of ice water had been poured into her body, extinguishing all her anger. Obsession, she repeated and looked at the wandering soul. Obsession. Alas. Yes, it's because of obsession. This kind of thing. What can you do? She stood there in a daze. Suddenly, she looked at Su Yusong as if she was pitiful. Should I kill you or not? After saying this, she held Zhuomujia's divine sense in her palm and paced back and forth for a few steps. It was as if her thoughts were suddenly in a mess, and she didn't know what to do for a moment. An evil person like you is willing to die for her. Alas, an evil person like you also knows how to love. Unfortunately, he doesn't. I'm also willing to die for him. I don't know why. She seemed to be muttering to herself. It's also obsession. Although she was frightening when she spoke with a stern expression, it seemed that her mind was clear and her thoughts were rational. Now, although her terrible momentum had dissipated, and her voice was also low and soft, she looked even more frightening. Because it seemed that because of Su Yusong's words, she fell into her own messy thoughts. She suddenly frowned, then smiled, and then gritted her teeth. It was as if there were several voices talking in her mind, which made her even more confused. After a quarter of an hour, Su Yusong didn't move at all. His eyes were fixed on the golden light in her hand. When Red Lady paced and muttered to herself, her palm loosened and tightened, as if she would crush that thing at any time because her mood was too agitated. In this way, she finally stopped. With her back facing Su Yusong, she stood for a while before suddenly turning to look at him. Fine. Although you are bad people, at least you understand love and affection. How many people in this world can really die for their lovers? Alas, letting you go is also giving two more sincere people in this world. She sighed in such a low voice. Su Yusong finally let out a sigh of relief. Then you, give her back to me. From then on, we will live in seclusion and finally... But Red Lady interrupted him, as if still trapped in her own world. But tell me, how can I make Li Yunxin love me as much as you love her? Su Yusong was stunned. So, Li Yunxin is really not dead? Red Lady blinked. Tell me, how can I make him love me as much as you love her? The wandering soul hesitated for a while and suddenly smiled. Trapped by love. Is it a good thing? She and I don't have a choice. Since we can only become wandering souls with obsession, if we entrust our obsession to each other, at least we will have a companion for thousands of years. Otherwise, what's the difference between a lonely soul and a wild ghost? You are also a ghost cultivator and you also have obsession. But if you entrust this obsession to a living creature, he may not have obsession with you. It's just a heart full of infatuation. Red Madame's eyes shone. She held Zhuomujia's divine sense and looked at the wandering soul. Then what do you want to say? Su Yusong looked at Red Lady and was silent for a while. At this time, the carp spirit, who had such terrifying power for some reason, said that she would let them go, finally calmed down. Therefore, he could see that the light in Red Lady's eyes at this moment was the light of joy. It was as if she couldn't make a decision for a long time, and now she was finally about to find what she was looking for, so she was pleasantly surprised. He knew what she wanted to find. She wanted to find a way to say, Li Yunxin loved me as much as you love her. This method didn't exist before. But now if Red Lady wanted it, she could have it. Su Yusong was also happy to tell Red Lady this method. He smiled. Let him become a ghost too. Also give him an obsession. Since you are willing to let us live, I will repay you with this. You kill him and take his soul back. And we will help you refine his soul into a wandering soul. Tell him to be infatuated with you. Tell him to love you only. You are each other's obsessions. Just like me and her, you can accompany each other until the end of time. This is the method I'm giving you. So Red Lady's eyes finally burst with surprise. She smiled sincerely. I knew it, Su Yusong also smiled. I know it too. People like us who are bound by obsessions. Alas, in the end I knew you were still lying to me to harm him. Red Lady's smile suddenly disappeared. Her face was as cold as ice. You are really bad. However, the smile of the wandering soul was still on his blurry face. What? No. After saying this, Red Lady suddenly retracted her finger. It was as if a bubble had been popped. With a soft, popping sound, Zhuomuxia's divine sense was crushed by her. Those memories, emotions, every joy, every anger, and even the obsessions that made the two wandering souls bound to each other, all turned into flowing light with this soft sound. His soul was destroyed. He had completely disappeared from this world, not leaving a single trace behind. Su Yusong let out a terrible, mournful, and extremely sharp scream. It was as if 10,000 banshees were wailing at the same time, or as if a fierce wind had passed through a long gap. This sound even forced back the fire clouds in the sky, causing the whole earth to tremble slightly. Suddenly, many faces appeared on his blurry face. Each face was filled with extreme anger and sorrow. His eyes were wide open as he stared fixedly at Red Lady, as if he wanted to swallow her alive. But Red Lady still looked at him coldly. So actually, you don't know what love is. Stubborn love. It's just an obsession. You deserve to die too. But I won't kill you, I want you to live. I want you to live and suffer. At this time, Su Yusong gritted his teeth and said, his voice seemed to come from his chest as if there were hundreds of him buzzing at the same time, heart-wrenching. As he spoke, his face became distorted, and he no longer looked like a human, but more like a ghost from the netherworld. You are so vicious, so vicious. Red Lady smiled slightly. Have you forgotten that I am a demon? Do you think you are the only one in this world who can play with others in the palm of your hand and capture them? Today I will let you have a taste of this. In the future, I will let others have a taste of this. As she spoke, she yawned. If you want to suffer, go and tell Li Yunxin. After saying that, she waved her sleeves. A gust of demonic wind wrapped in lightning rose from the ground, swept her directly through the fire clouds, and went straight to the horizon. Only this wandering soul was left. This was indeed a lonely wandering soul. He stood in the same place, and his face became more and more ferocious and terrifying. It was as if a beast was about to drill out of his body and devour people. Since Red Lady had left, the fire clouds that filled the sky slowly dispersed. The wandering souls that had been chased away by him before also heard his mournful roar, and also sensed an extremely terrifying aura leaving. Only then did they dare to fly into the fire clouds. They only saw the terrifying appearance of their senior brother. They were all shocked, but for a moment they did not dare to go forward. They were not brainless people, how could they not guess what had happened? But they did not know who on earth had actually shattered Su Yusong's skin. Before this, a total of 35 wandering souls had returned to help, and 2 had died in battle. Another 2 were originally going to investigate the Cloud Mountain, but in the end they ran into the bad-tempered Bai Yunxin. Their physical bodies were destroyed, and their true bodies were also seriously injured. Then 8 of them left with Zhuomuxia, but they were also met by Red Lady and all of them were scattered. In just a short 2 hours they could be said to be extremely unlucky. If Li Yunxin saw this, he might sigh about how the tables had turned. Thus, there were only 23 wandering souls left and Su Yusong, who did not even look like a human anymore. Since eldest senior brother could not take care of matters for the time being, the one with the highest cultivation base among the remaining wandering souls, the one who had possessed the physical body of a mystical realm cultivator, temporarily took care of matters for him. He wanted to ask Su Yusong if he had any other orders, but suddenly he felt the ground tremble violently. It was as if a god had started walking on the ground. Chapter 531. Too many things had happened in the past dozens of hours. Now, even the soul of Zhuomuxia, one of the false saints, had been dispersed, and their eldest senior brother now looked even crazier and more terrifying. It seemed that there was nothing else that could make people feel worse and dumbfounded. But, when the wandering souls rushed out of the fire cloud that had previously wrapped Su Yusong and Red Lady, and saw the scene in front of them, they couldn't help but widen their eyes and suck in a breath of cold air. There were indeed people walking on the ground. But they were huge and terrifying people. Between heaven and earth, on this wasteland that used to be a battlefield, 2 huge and ferocious human figures appeared. It was already dusk. Because of the huge cloud mountains, the sunset glow on the horizon could not penetrate much light. At the end of the horizon, there was only the black silhouette of the Manchu Mountains and the Tuaruntan Mountains, as well as the greenish-gray sky that looked like an iron curtain. Against the sky and the short but not short mountains, the two huge human figures on the ground looked particularly strange and terrifying. In fact, when the great demons revealed their true bodies, they were at least 100 feet tall. Although this true body might not be the size of their original form, but because of the magic power in terms of grandeur, it was not inferior to these two human figures at all. But the two in front of them were two skeletons. They looked like human skeletons, but they were obviously not human. They had many more skeletons than human beings. Although they all seemed to have a head, 2 arms and 2 legs, many bones had long and sharp barbs growing on them. It was hard to imagine how terrible they looked when they were alive and had flesh and blood. Now these craggy skeletons were walking slowly on the ground. Every time their feet landed, it seemed to make the mountains tremble slightly. The little light left in the sky shone through the cracks of their bones, but it seemed to make the earth even darker. And they didn't seem to be controlled by magic or divine power. They were alive. The wandering souls who rushed out of the fire cloud to see the scene in front of them, looked up at the two huge shadows that almost stretched between heaven and earth, and were immediately stunned. They seemed to be breathing. White mist rose from the gaps between their bones. If one were to observe the details of their bodies from such a long distance, it would be possible to see dense fibers that were wandering on the surface of the pale blue bones. They looked like muscle fibers, but they were bronze in color. And with every step they took, the number of these fibers that slithered like snakes on their bodies increased. What is this? A wandering soul turned pale with fright. After all, it had been more than 200 years since he took over this body. As the leader of the Daotong sect who was at the peak of the true state, he had seen a lot. Even if she was a fake, she had cultivated a heart that was not so easily shaken by the baptism of time. But now, seeing this thing, the heart in his body could not help but beat wildly. It was hard to tell whether it was because of fear or some other emotion. In fact, apart from being huge and weird, these two skeletons did not pose any threat for the time being. They're just walking. However, they gave off the feeling that they were even more terrifying than the gigantic demon kings that had appeared on the battlefield before. Just looking at them was enough to make one feel breathless. It was as if the sky was about to collapse and the earth was about to cave in. Humans stood in this world in fear and had no one to rely on. They had to bend down and stick their bodies to the ground to feel safe. If these wandering souls were demons and not humans, they would probably know what this feeling was like. This was the power and pressure that came from a naturally powerful race. He cried out in panic. The wandering soul who had a mystical realm body also gritted his teeth and suppressed the strange throbbing in his heart. He frowned slightly and thought about it. He raised his hand and brushed it over his eyes. This thing looked like a skeleton, but its aura was strange and terrifying. He thought that it might be related to ghosts and monsters. Therefore he raised his hand and opened his inner eye so that he could see ghosts. It's fine if you don't want to see. When he saw it, he was shocked and let out an "ah," just like the wandering soul before. Before this, he could only see countless bronze fibers swimming on the skeletons' bodies. Now he realized that there were souls of the dead on them. Thousands, tens of thousands of souls of the dead crawled on their bodies. From afar they looked like tiny ants or aphids. It was as if there was something extremely attractive in the cracks of these two skeletons. The souls of the dead that had existed on the ground because of this tragic war were originally wandering aimlessly on the plains in a daze. But now all of them were excited. They maintained the terrifying appearance they had when they died and rushed toward the two skeletons from all directions. Once they reached their feet, they climbed up along the metacarpal bones and leg bones, and burrowed into the cracks of the bones. The scene was extremely strange and terrifying. It made people's scalps tingle when they saw it, as if there were countless insects trying to burrow into their bodies. Because of these two skeletons, the souls of the dead on the plains also became a torrent. No one had ever seen such a scene before. What exactly was this thing? And the direction they were heading toward was Cloud Mountain. Therefore, the wandering souls in the profound realm were shocked. They immediately turned around and returned to the fiery clouds that had not completely dissipated, intending to see what their senior brother had in mind. Before the battle began, these wandering souls of the Freemasonry knew the elders' intentions. The elders' plans were the same as those of the demons. Originally, they said that the great demon dragons wanted the souls of demons and cultivators. Then they would refine these souls to improve their own realm. Therefore, the elders were willing to push the boat with the current. Although they didn't know what their true intentions were, they also wanted the cultivators of the Xianmen to die and the forces of the Xianmen sect to be destroyed. Although the wandering souls had their own wishes, in the end they finally knew that the elders were better than them. The Black Rain not long ago, did not allow them to have any other thoughts, and they killed most of the people in an instant. But now, seeing this scene, the remnant souls on the plains, the remnant souls that the dragon son had spent a lot of effort to create, seemed to be all sucked away by the two skeletons. And the direction they were heading toward was Cloud Mountain. Could it be that the original goal of the dragon son wasn't them, but Cloud Mountain? Then what about the wandering souls? Therefore, as soon as he rushed into the fiery clouds, he shouted, "Senior brother! There are two outside," but when he said that, he was stunned. The two skeletons outside were terrifying, and the current Su Yusong didn't look inferior to it. His original expression was ferocious and terrifying, as if he was about to become a monster. But now, in just a short span of a dozen breaths, he had returned to normal. He just stared at the wandering soul that rushed in, not even blinking. When he was slightly stunned because of the shock, he suddenly opened his mouth, his voice low and cold, "Junior brother. How do I usually treat you?" Hearing this, the wandering soul was slightly stunned. Then, without saying a word, he immediately exhaled and activated several mysterious light restrictions around his body. He was not one of those fools who, upon seeing a person, ask either darkly or preoccupied, "So-and-so, how do I usually treat you?" and then stupidly stare with wide, innocent eyes and say, "Of course you have nothing to say to me." One had to know that the moment such words were said, the person would be slapped or killed by a knife. That was why he said in a low voice after being on guard, "Senior brother, what do you want to do?" Su Yusong actually laughed coldly, his expression crazy and strange. "You should also feel that senior brother and senior sister usually treat you well, right? It's not that I want to do anything. I want your physical body. Your physical body is in the mysterious realm, the highest cultivation level among the rest. It's enough for me." He paused. "Take it back to Cloud Mountain and kill that Li Yunxin again. It must be because of that little B** starred. It must be because of that little B** starred in Cloud Mountain. It's all his schemes." At this point he seemed to be reminded of the pain in his heart again. His expression became ferocious again, and his tone became crazy again. But the wandering soul still said in a low voice, "Senior brother, you think too much. Usually, senior brother and senior sister use the physical body of a saint to lead us. I respect your strength, so naturally I don't dare to disobey you. But now, senior brother has lost that body, and I have used this body for more than 100 years. Even a broom is precious. It's impossible to take it away with just a word." Su Yusong turned hostile like flipping a book. But his junior brother also seemed to have received his teachings and was not much slower than him. But Su Yusong still grinned. "Impossible? What can't be possible?" After saying this, he suddenly pounced on the restrictions. The face of the mysterious realm wandering soul turned cold, and he raised his hand to use a divine ability. But just as he moved his fingers, he suddenly felt his body go numb, and he couldn't even move his tongue. No, it was not that his body was numb. It was that his soul was numb. With this, the restrictions in front of him immediately disappeared without a trace. He could only watch as Su Yusong pounced into his body and shouted fiercely, "Did you forget that I helped you refine this soul of yours? Now I can take whatever I want and eat whatever I want." This was the last voice the wandering soul heard. Su Yusong pounced into his body, but what he took was not only the physical body. There was also the soul. This wandering soul, refined from the remnant soul of a human, was bound in a body and couldn't go anywhere. As soon as Su Yusong occupied his body, the two immediately merged into one, but it was more like his soul was absorbed by Su Yusong. According to what he said before, he had done something when refining this wandering soul, so that he could prevent them from betraying him at a critical moment and take their lives. But now this Su Yusong seemed to have lost his mind because of Zhuomu's death. Except for the thought of avenging her, he didn't care about anything else. He didn't know if it was because of his sincere and deep feelings, or because of his broken obsession, or both. Chapter 532. He swallowed the remnant soul and occupied the body. He was only sluggish for a moment. After another breath he could move freely. His eyes, ears, mouth, and nose trembled strangely for a while. Then he stretched out his arms and moved his legs. Suddenly he shouted, "Not enough, not enough. I don't have enough strength." The current Su Yusong was like a different person from the previous Su Yusong. This not only referred to his realm, cultivation, and physical body, but also the things that made up the original Su Yusong. In the secular world, there was no dispute why a person was Zhang San and not Li Si. Zhang San had Zhang San's body and Li Si had Li Si's body. Even if the name, clothes, and status were changed, the person was still the same person. But for cultivators, identity, status, and even body did not seem to be the key. The key was a person's mind and memory. This Su Yusong was a remnant soul before he became a wandering soul. Since the remnant soul wanted to exist in the world and retain its mind without slowly dissipating, it had to be supported by an obsession. He said that he and Zhuamuja were each other's obsessions, and the two of them were also obsessed with their feelings for their child who died young. Now that one of them was missing, this Su Yusong looked very strange. He did still have memories of the past. He remembered Li Yunxin. When he couldn't find Bai Yunxin or Red Lady for revenge, he poured all his hatred on Li Yunxin. But his mind seemed to be no longer his own. His temperament had changed greatly. Now the tone, behavior, and character of this Su Yusong were very different from before. And his body and appearance had also changed. At this time the Su Yusong seemed to be a new Su Yusong. And the former wandering soul who was reluctant to part with love, in a sense, after X and Shilio lost their favor and Zhuamuja's mind was crushed by Red Lady, had already died. The person in front of him was just a stranger who only had his previous memories. This new Su Yusong, after gritting his teeth and shouting, suddenly fell silent again. But his silence seemed to be more manic than manic. He was suppressing all his anger and hiding it. He gritted his teeth so hard that his eyes became bloodshot, and his voice trembled slightly. Only then did he slowly walk out of the fiery cloud. When he walked out, he naturally saw the two huge figures advancing towards the cloud mountain. Innumerable dead souls climbed on it, slowly making their bodies more substantial. There were no bones in a human's abdomen, but the skeleton's abdomen was protected by flat bone plates. In the gaps between the bone plates and ribs he could already see internal organs. However, rather than saying that it was born, it was more accurate to say that it was originally withered and stuck in the cracks of the bones. Now that they had received some kind of nourishment, they became plump again. It was just that they were wriggling and trembling in the skeleton. The scene was extremely strange and terrifying. As long as he saw this scene, it would be hard for him to forget it for the rest of his life. On the surface of those bones, some roaming bronze-colored fibers slowly came to a stop. Then they attached themselves to it as if they were slowly forming flesh and blood. As for those souls, they were attracted by an invisible force and climbed onto the skeleton one after another. Once they got into the gaps of those fibers, they looked as if they were quickly tired. Then they slowly curled up into a ball, and something in their body slowly shone with a dark red light. In the end, it turned into a round ball. The densely packed ball was also entangled by the same dense fibers, as if there were eyeballs hidden under the flesh and skin, making people feel cold and numb. The strange thing was that these glowing balls were the souls of demons. And the souls of the cultivators were gradually melting, as if they were being dispersed into pure spiritual power. The wandering souls were surprised to see this scene, but then they saw Su Yusong, who had taken over the body of the cultivator in Mysterious Realm, walk out. His expression was not right, and even his movements were slightly strange. If it was any other day they would have been puzzled. But too many unbelievable things had happened today, so they did not pay attention to it. Instead they asked, "How is Senior Brother? Did Senior Brother say what we should do?" Su Yusong looked at them in silence for a while, then suddenly said, "Senior Brother, you can't do it. Go in and take a look." Hearing this, the wandering souls looked at each other, and for a moment they felt a little lost. It was not that these wandering souls were really in love with each other. Instead, they were originally on the same boat. Before this, they were just tools in the hands of the elders. Except for Su Yusong and Zhuamuja, the other wandering souls had not even seen the elders' faces, and they did not even know the origins of the elders. All the wishes of the elders were conveyed by the two fake saints. Before this, when they learned that the elders were going to abandon the profound gate, everyone felt a little anxious. They were originally tools that the elders used to infiltrate and control the profound gate. Now that the cunning rabbit was dead, wouldn't it be cooking the dog? Therefore, Su Yusong and Zhuamuja planned to be independent, and this group of people had no second thoughts. But at this time, their senior brother and senior sister's plan had completely failed. If it were not for their good luck, the previous rain of fire might have killed them as well. Now that they, the wandering souls, had really become wandering souls with nothing to rely on. Now that Zhuamuja had disappeared, and when they heard that Su Yusong was also done for, they immediately became even more terrified. Therefore, after he said this, in just a short while, a dozen people turned around and entered the whistling fire cloud. The remaining few were also about to move, but Su Yusong's expression suddenly changed and he shouted sternly, "Freeze!" However, this group of people were not frozen at the same time. Su Yusong had done something when he was refining the wandering souls. But among these people not everyone was refined by him and Zhuomuxia. Among the wandering souls of the Freemasonry, the oldest was Qing Liangzi. However, Qing Liangzi was the first to be refined, and it was not done perfectly. Just like many crafts, they had to be researched and improved bit by bit before the technology could gradually mature. Therefore, it was only at this time that Su Yusong and Zhuomuxia could be considered to be of great use. Therefore, the things after that were done by them, and before that they would not fall for his trick. There were 9 people left. 5 people who were frozen by him. The other 4 were stunned at first and then suddenly turned their faces to look outside. Their first thought was not that Su Yusong was going to attack them, but that he had discovered something about the enemy. It was also at this moment that the bodies of the 5 people collapsed at the same time. Su Yusong only took a moment to collect their souls, and it only took him 2 breaths of time to devour them. When the 4 people sensed that something was wrong and looked at him again, a ferocious and deranged expression appeared on his face again. Good, good, good. More. He shouted crazily. With just a raise of his hand, he instantly smashed the head of another true realm wandering soul. Like peeling off the shell and taking out the meat, he grabbed the soul in his hand and suddenly opened his mouth to the ear, and swallowed it alive in front of everyone. Su Yusong of Cloud Mountain was considered a normal person no matter how one looked at it. Although Su Yusong had already gone mad just now, he could still forcibly suppress the violent emotions in his heart. But now, after devouring the souls of 6 people, it seemed that the part that once belonged to him was becoming less and less. All the negative emotions superimposed and mixed together, forming a monster that only had Su Yusong's memory and name, but the rest had nothing to do with the people in the past. Even the wandering souls, who were also monsters, were afraid of such a monster. The remaining 3 people turned pale with fright and quickly retreated, shouting, "Who the hell are you?" But now, Su Yusong was surrounded by a terrifying, violent aura. His eyes became bloodshot and his mouth opened wide. He ignored their shouts and also ignored the dozen people who realized that something was wrong and rushed out of the fire cloud. He only said, "Not enough. Not enough. Then how can I kill that little bastard, and then kill those 2 female demons? Give it all." As soon as he finished speaking, he flew into the crowd and attacked. Although the wandering souls claimed to be proficient in the arts of Daotong and Kenzo. However, knowing a theory and actually cultivating and comprehending it were 2 different things. They had taken over the body, but without the state of mind and comprehension, they could not unleash the full power of these bodies, and there were also many divine abilities that they could not use. Otherwise, the 2 fake saints from before would not have been chased and beaten by a group of high-level cultivators of the Xianmen sect with their Taishan realm. This group of people were better at Taoist techniques than demons, but they were not as good as cultivators. Now that they had lost control of the Xianmen sect, the situation was indeed very awkward. It was also because of this that if the remaining wandering souls here joined forces, they would be able to kill the crazy Su Yusong with some effort and price. But now, there was no reason for them to fight or stay here. Seeing Su Yusong charging over, the last bit of people's hearts dissipated. An hour ago they drove the surviving cultivators of the Xianmen sect away from this place. An hour later they also had to leave. Previously, when those cultivators left, they still bowed to Cloud Mountain, knowing that they would probably not see this sacred ancestral court again in this life. Now, the wandering souls did not even have the time or mood to bow. For a moment, they went far away in all directions, quickly disappearing without a trace. The experts of the true realm had made up their minds to escape. Without powerful restrictions and enough divine abilities, even the experts of the profound realm could not do anything for a while. This Su Yusong chased for a while and only captured a wandering soul of the enlightened master realm and swallowed it. When he looked around again, he only saw the surging souls of the dead on the wasteland and the 2 huge, strange, but unswerving figures advancing towards Cloud Mountain. But at this time in his eyes he could see nothing but Li Yunxin. He did not stop nor did he pause. After roaring at the sky, his figure turned into a blood-colored stream of light, heading straight for Cloud Mountain. At this time he did not care about the overall situation, the future, the elders. He only wanted to kill that Li Yunxin. But someone else saw him. Dozens of miles away. So they don't know either. These Freemasons don't know either. The person who spoke was hatred. At this point in the war, strange things happened. But no matter what, for the demons, it seemed to be a perfect and unexpected result. The cultivators of the celestial sect were killed. The unruly demon monarchs of the various paths were also exhausted. The wasteland was full of souls of the dead, and the huge skeletons were even advancing towards Cloud Mountain. Perhaps they could break through Cloud Mountain today, achieving an unprecedented feat for the demons. However, at this moment, Lord Tongtian Hatred, who should be acting like a victor, did not look very good, because his left arm was gone. Not only was his left arm gone, but his left ear and a small part of his head were also gone. It was as if someone had chopped him with a big knife. He tried to dodge but failed, so the knife cut diagonally and cut them all off. If it were a human, he would have died a long time ago. But after all, he was a dragon, a demon among demons. Now the smooth wounds on his body had been sealed by the golden blood. But his hair was messy and he looked a little embarrassed. But his voice was full of energy, so his life was not in danger. He was now standing on a high hill. Beside him was Zithar. There was also the body of the golden horn giant centipede, and thousands more demon corpses. The way these corpses died was also strange. There were no scars, but their bodies were shriveled. It was as if their souls and vitality were taken away by something, and their actions and expressions were still the same as when they were alive. It was obvious that they died suddenly and quickly without any chance to react. And the Zithar beside him didn't look very good either. Although her clothes were not messed up and there were no scars on her body. But her face was pale, her cheeks were sunken, and her lips turned from pink to white, as if she had just been seriously ill and hadn't recovered yet. I'm afraid it's all for the benefit of others. Zithar voice became cold, almost biting her lips as she spoke. He stares at the two huge figures without moving his eyes for a moment. You told me before that you were possessed by Little Nine, so you came to Dongting from time to time, and then he took you to the pitfall mountain of the Evil King. Then you had a fierce battle with Evil King and flattened that mountain. Hatred interrupted him, took a step back, spread out his hands and sighed, Young Dragon Master, I have told you many times. I didn't expect things to turn out like this. Do you think I can hide my thoughts from you? Yes, I went to Evil King's pitfall mountain and injured him severely. Then I found that there were also skeletons under the mountain. Then I learned the way to control these skeletons from him. I swear again, Young Dragon Master, Big Brother. He shook his head helplessly. What the Evil King said to me back then was indeed true. You have to nourish its soul as a sacrifice first. After sacrificing tens of thousands of souls, it will come back to life and find trouble with the cultivators of Shenmen. When those souls are exhausted, it will stop. I swear he did say that to me. Big Brother, weren't you there when we were experimenting with this before? If you suspect that I'm the one who did this, look at me now. Hatred raised his hand and knocked on the wound on his head. There was a clanging sound as if he was knocking on an iron plate. My head is broken. Why did I have to get myself into such a mess? What good does this situation do for me? Big Brother, if you still don't believe me, just kill me now. But Zithar Master still didn't turn to look at him. Instead, she narrowed her eyes, as if she didn't care about his explanation. She said that they can move after sacrificing tens of thousands of souls. But she didn't say that they won't recognize us after they move. The secret method you said to control them will be useless when they really come back to life. Now, hundreds of thousands of souls in the wilderness will be sucked away by them, and it seems that they won't stop. There is no such thing as stopping by themselves. Speaking of this, he was silent for a while. Then he turned to look at Hatred and sighed, I'm not suspecting you. But, you and I have both been schemed against. Someone told you those things through the mouth of the Evil King, probably for today's situation. We have done a stupid thing. We have released those incredible things. Just now they actually wanted to swallow us. Us, two mysterious realm cultivators, couldn't even protect me, Amount. Tell me about it. Now that things have come to this, we can't benefit from it, and the wandering souls of the Freemasonry seem to be falling apart. Those so-called elders. If they are really hiding in Cloud Mountain, they certainly won't benefit from it. Needless to mention the cultivators of Shenmen, so in the end, who benefits? Hatred finally heaved a sigh of relief, because Zithar Master no longer looked at him with that cold and gloomy gaze. Then she shook her head. Sigh. Young Dragon Master, in my opinion we should leave this place first. What if Moon Anji benefited? Our Lord Shinryu benefited. Zithar Master stared straight at him and said through gritted teeth, what a good mantis stalks the cicada, unaware of the oriole behind. Chapter 533. Zithar, who had always been gentle and calm, now showed such an expression on her face and used such a tone. This made Hatred, who was also a profound realm great demon, feel slightly alarmed. This meant that the losses and setbacks in this battle had exceeded the young Dragon Master's expectations. If she was just angry, it would not be a big deal. But as the saying goes, lose at the swinging corner, gain at the mulberry elm. Who could guarantee that he would not want to take back what he had not gained from the battlefield? After all, in this world, no one liked to return empty-handed. Then, for example, right now, the two uncontrollable skeletons were continuously sucking away the souls on the plains. How did they use those things to refine their demon power? After realizing this, a dangerous thought appeared in Yazid's mind for a moment. Why don't we just swallow them? But then he realized that the person beside him was Zither June. If Zither June had the same thought, the one who would be swallowed would probably be him. Thus, when Zither June looked at him with such a cold gaze, Hatred did not have the mood to think about whether it was the Divine Lord or Mu Nanju who benefited. He wanted to run away from Zither June as soon as possible. So he said, "We need to think about this at length. If it really is the Divine Lord's plan, then we need to be more sincere and united. Now that the arrogant demon kings are gone, we can only stick together." His voice trailed off at this point. He hesitated for a while and could not continue. This was because Qin Jun had been glaring at him ever since she said those words. There was no emotion in her eyes or on her face. She stood motionless on the hill like a statue. This appearance made Yazid even more flustered, and even cold sweat oozed from his forehead. Finally, he could not help but take 2 steps back. "Young Dragon Master, you know that among all the brothers and sisters, I am the most loyal to you." But Zither June still did not speak. Only when Hatred gritted his teeth and took a deep breath as if he wanted to say something did he suddenly turn around. "What are you panicking for? I know your loyalty. Little Bai has told me everything about you." Yazid's eyes suddenly widened and his mouth opened wide. "Bai? Wanderer?" In the next moment he cried out involuntarily, "Young Dragon Master, I didn't." Qin Jun waved his hand. "If you had, you wouldn't be standing beside me today. That's not what I meant. He said that since you don't like women, maybe you like men." He smiled ambiguously and shook his head. "That's what he thinks." Hatred stood rooted to the ground, unable to speak for a long time. After a dozen or so breaths, he said in a daze, "That Wanderer Bai has always liked to play with me. So he's monitoring me?" The Zither monarch snorted noncommittally. He kicked away a shriveled corpse in front of him and said in a deep voice, "So, you don't need to let your imagination run wild at this time. You've been possessed by Little Nine, so you know what you look like. If there's no restriction to trap you at night, you'll probably wander around. I don't care about such things. I've told you before. The reason I want to kill these cultivators and demons is not because I covet their remnant souls. What realm do I want to improve? But for the sake of the big picture, I want everyone to listen to me. No matter how strong you are, what can you do? Is the Golden Rock King strong enough? He's still been sealed for 1,000 years. After saying these words, his expression softened. He glanced at Hatred from the corner of his eyes. "Second brother, you're smart. But your cleverness is petty cleverness. Don't always look at yourself. Don't always think about how strong you want to become, what you want to refine and swallow. These are all small ways, the ways of an ordinary man. You have to look at the big picture. Do you understand?" Hatred was silent for a while, then said, "So? Young Dragon Master doesn't care whether you can get the dragon soul or not, whether you can do too." The Zither monarch sighed and looked at him helplessly. Hatred immediately said, Yes, young Dragon Master is right. I shouldn't always think about my own bravery, I should look at the big picture. But looking at the big picture, young Dragon Master, we should leave. There's no point in staying here for too long. Who knows how terrifying those two things will be if they really grow flesh and blood." It wasn't that he, a profound realm demon, was timid. But when he thought about the appearance of the 2 skeletons not long ago, he still felt a lingering fear. They had used a secret method to draw the souls they had collected into the bodies of the 2 skeletons, bringing them back to life. This step had been tried before. Li Yunxin had guessed that after he burned the wild forest, the souls of many creatures in the forest disappeared because they were sucked away by the skeletons. His guess was correct. However, that was only one of the many experiments he had done. Therefore, the Zither monarch and Hatred knew that if they fed tens of thousands of souls to the skeletons, they would come back to life. If one were to say that it was strong, perhaps its own strength wasn't that strong. It had just reached the Grand Realm and it couldn't use any divine abilities. Moreover, the tens of thousands of souls could only keep it alive for a quarter of an hour. When the time was up, it would become a dead thing again. But it had another unimaginable ability. Even the Zither monarch was shocked by this ability. Because of this, they believed that if they used this thing, they would definitely be able to kill all the demon kings and cultivators in one fell swoop. Once this thing came to life, it would be like the weak water surrounding the midland, forming some kind of restriction around it. Demons and cultivators would be shrouded by this restriction, and their divine abilities would be restricted. The range and strength of this restriction would change according to the number of souls fed to the skeletons. If they fed tens of thousands of souls, this thing could turn all cultivators below the true realm within a few miles into ordinary people, who couldn't use any divine abilities and could only rely on their physical bodies. The divine abilities of demons and cultivators above the true realm would also be greatly reduced. At that time, although the skeletons had just stepped into the grand realm, it would be too easy for them to kill them. They had experimented several times before and nothing had gone wrong. But they didn't expect that this time, a huge mess would occur. It was also given to the souls of the dead. They also used a secret spell from before. But these two skeletons wouldn't listen to them. It was like feeding an untamed beast. If you first gave it a piece of meat, it would obediently swallow it. But if there was a pile of fresh meat next to it and you gave it another piece, it probably wouldn't even look at it. Perhaps it was because the number of souls on this battlefield had reached an unimaginable level. When these two skeletons really came to life, they immediately went berserk. The secret spell couldn't suppress them at all, and the restriction on their bodies was unimaginably strong. The Zither monarch was at the peak of the profound realm, but even such a strong expert like him had almost lost all of his divine abilities under the restriction of these skeletons, and couldn't even dance in the air. These two terrifying things didn't have any intelligence, and only wanted to destroy all living beings in their path. The Zither monarch in hatred had to use all of their strength to avoid being killed, but the demons that gathered back together had all lost their souls. Facing such things, it was just as hatred had said, once they completely regrown, how terrifying would they be? But the Zither monarch shook his head. We can't leave. He paused for a moment, then said in a low voice, You must know, we were the ones who released these things. The evil king told you that these things are ancient demons with the power to destroy the world. In my opinion, although his words are exaggerated, they are not without reason. If we leave these two alone, they will regrow their flesh and possess even more terrifying power. If we escape now, where can we escape to in the future? Hatred was stunned. The Zither monarch's words were too righteous and magnanimous. It didn't sound like something a demon would say, but more like something a cultivator of the profound sect would say. The Zither monarch seemed to see through his doubts and said, You must know, we originally wanted to rule the world. If the world is destroyed, it will be our loss, not someone else's. Hatred opened his mouth. He wanted to say something, but in the end he didn't. He really didn't know what to say. If he didn't know that this big brother of his was actually very shrewd and intelligent, he would have thought that he had gone crazy. From the sound of it, he already considered the world as his own and planned to manage it with all his heart. With just a few words, he would have to praise this young dragon master for his astonishing boldness and determination to become the ruler of the world. But now that he really had to do it, if he lost his life, how could he talk about ruling the world? But at this moment, how could he dare to speak carelessly? He had seen the Zither monarch's previous anger. If he really touched the bad luck, it would not end well for him. He could only sigh in his heart and said, I will listen to young dragon master's instructions. So what do we do now? I'm not doing anything. Wait for someone to show up. The Zither monarch said in a low voice. Little White's theory of earth qi and feng shui may be a bit far-fetched, but there is one thing that is accurate. Of these two skeletons, one is hidden in the Guanyuan cave of the Yi Kingdom, the other is hidden under the Xiankong mountain. That should also be a cave. This is definitely not a coincidence. In that case, someone must have placed this thing here in the past. And now, someone used the mouth of the evil king to make this thing move, resulting in the current situation. This means, there must be a way to control them. He paused here and cast his gaze into the distance. The two skeletons were getting closer and closer to Cloud Mountain. Previously, they walked on the wasteland with monotonous and mechanical steps, like marionettes. But now, there was another kind of body language. They began to show subtle emotions like real living beings, as if their will and emotions were slowly recovering. They began to try to raise their heads and shake their arms. It was as if something in Cloud Mountain was attracting them, making them want to peel off Cloud Mountain and grab that thing. So let's take a look. If someone really used our hands to make this happen, then let's see what they want from Cloud Mountain. At this point, his tone became more and more calm. But Yazi, who knew him, also knew that in this peaceful tone, the coldness was getting heavier. This debt cannot be settled like this. Since they asked me to do something for them, I have to repay them 1,000 times over. Every debt has its debtor. If I don't see who that person is, How can I leave in peace? Chapter 534. At this point, Hatred had nothing else to say. Just as he was about to sigh and say something, he saw a beam of black light coming from the sky. His heart skipped a beat, but when he took a closer look, he heaved a sigh of relief. The black light was none other than their third sister, Evil Devil Chow Feng. The newcomer suddenly appeared. She was tall and slender, wearing a black robe and silver armor. Her dark golden hair was tied up in a bun. She looked like a cold and sharp beauty, totally different from Qin Jun. She flew over from the sky and landed on the hill. She walked 2 steps and stopped. Without waiting for Yazi to speak, he pointed at the direction of the 2 skeletons and asked, "Did you 2 do this?" At this moment, the Yazi's cultivation was greatly damaged, and it was anxious in its heart, so its aura was slightly weaker. When he was hesitating about what to say, Qin Jun said softly, "Third sister, why are you so angry?" He just stood with his hands clasped behind his back and looked at the skeletons in the distance without looking back. The evil devil ignored Hatred. She took 2 more steps and stood beside Qin Jun. She raised her eyebrows and stared at him. "You gathered so many people just to do this? Release this thing? Do you know what it is?" Qin Jun smiled indifferently. "Of course However, he only managed to say 3 words before the evil lord pushed him hard on his shoulder. "Who do you think you are?" "Of course you are. These are the skeletons of an ancient demon. Why didn't you tell me that you were going to do this? Why did you bring my second brother along?" Every time she asked, she would push Qin Jun, without using any supernatural power. It was just like a quarrel between 2 brothers and sisters. Qin Jun's demonic power was greatly damaged. But even when her demonic power was not damaged, although she was Long's son and a demon, she was different from ordinary siblings. However, if this Sha Jun, whose cultivation level was almost the same as his, really came to push and shove, and with his status, what else could he do? Of course he couldn't do anything. He also couldn't push her like a child fighting. Therefore, when the evil devil pushed him, he frowned. Third, before he could finish his sentence, he was pushed again. "Don't you dare," he said angrily. The evil lord was even angrier than him. He raised his leg and kicked him again. "Don't do anything. Don't do anything." The zither lady's lips had already turned pale. But now his face turned red again. You have something to say." In the end he was still pushed, kicked, and interrupted. Finally, he could not bear it anymore and no longer stood in the wind with his hands behind his back. Leaping back 3 or 4 steps, he cursed, "Sanjin, are you shrew? If you touch me again, I'll be really annoyed." Hatred gritted his teeth and hurriedly hid to the side, not making a sound. The evil lord placed his hands on his waist and glared at the zither lord. "How did you release it? Go and retrieve it." Qin Jun also stared at her with widened eyes, looking extremely annoyed. "Accept? Collect my ass. I can't take it anymore. After it was released, it wouldn't listen to me anymore. Let's die together." When the evil lord heard this, he was stunned. His annoyed expression froze on his face. Soon, it turned into a serious look of worry. He frowned and asked, "Are you serious?" Qin Jun glared at her and said nothing. At this moment, Hatred heaved a sigh of relief. "Third sister, we didn't expect this to happen. Here's what happened." He immediately recounted everything that had transpired. Qin Jun glared at him while he was telling the story, but he pretended not to see it. He was also afraid of those 2 things. Now that she saw how serious the evil lord was, the worry that she had suppressed in her heart rose again. When he finished, the evil lord looked at him and then at the zither lord with a gloomy face. "So, only the 2 of you know about this matter, and you hid it from us? Before I released them, didn't I tell my brothers and sisters that we were going to leave the battlefield?" Hatred said in a low voice. "Before the battle, I also mentioned that we were going to gather all of you here," he explained in a low voice. But it was just an explanation. For example, he said something like, "before the battle." Actually, it was ambiguous at that time. Only after the incident, when he thought about it, did he feel that he did have such an impression. In the end he said, "Evil Lord, you also know about the primitive ancient demon?" At this time the evil lord slowly calmed down. She looked at the zither lord and said, "Not only do I know about it, I know much more than you do. You too. You don't even know the origin of this thing. You dare to come here after listening to the evil king's lies." When she said this, the zither lord frowned again as if she wanted to say something. So the evil lord snorted. "Forget it, I won't waste my breath on you. Listen carefully, what is that thing?" She didn't stop or pretend to be mysterious. Instead, she frowned and spoke clearly and quickly. The primitive ancient demon is the ancestor of the demons. Because it wanted to destroy the world but couldn't be killed completely, it was broken up and sealed in different places in Midland. In the past, even the gods were afraid of its power, but now you have awakened it. Think about how much trouble you have caused. She didn't say much, but there was a lot of information. Even though the Zither Lord was still angry because of her previous actions, she frowned and said, "Who told you this?" The evil Lord looked at her and said, "The Rock King." The Zither Lord raised her eyebrows and resumed her calm look. "Oh, you're right. It should be him. But you knew this before, but you didn't say it. Why did you only say it now?" Hearing his tone, the evil Lord glared at him again and was about to hit him again. The Zither Lord hurriedly took a step back. We are hiding something from you. Aren't you hiding something from us too? Second brother, isn't that right? But hatred didn't dare to get involved in the fight between the two of them, so he just acted like a yes man. The evil Lord raised his eyebrows again. Hiding something? You two created this devil star and triggered the Earth Chi. The formation on the ground was originally used to seal the Rock King. After this incident, his restrictive spell loosened a little, so he sent me this letter immediately. Unfortunately, I was too late. The Zither Lord snorted. Is what he said the truth? Why are you afraid of the gods? Have you ever seen one with your own eyes? The evil Lord stared at him. Chonyo, good. You don't even believe me. Good. After saying this, he turned to look at Yazi and said, "Second brother, does he always tell you that a person's realm doesn't matter? You should set your sights on the world, be lofty, open, and strategically advantageous, right?" Hatred was slightly stunned. He did say this before. And he really did say it just now. So he nodded. I also think it makes sense. What bullsh** T logic is that? You think he doesn't want to? The evil Lord immediately snorted. Your big brother was born at the peak of the mystic realm. He is only one step away from the Grand Supreme level. But he hasn't made any progress in the past 1,000 years. You think he doesn't want to? He can't. That's why he said all those nonsense to you. The Zither Lord's face turned red and his robe billowed. He said sternly, "Sanjiner, don't go too far." The evil Lord didn't care about his anger at all. He only used one sentence to stun him. Many years ago, you must have wanted to know how a demon could become a Grand Supreme like a human cultivator. But after a long and fruitless search, you finally gave up the idea, didn't you? Let me tell you today, I have a way. And it was the Rock King who told me this. You said you don't believe him, so do you want to listen to him? What? Qin Jun looked at her suspiciously, but she could not hide the look of surprise on her face despite her efforts to suppress it. Are you serious? I'm not like you two, I don't speak the truth. The evil Lord looked at him in hatred angrily, like an elder sister looking at two disappointing younger brothers. If you want to listen, you have to settle the matter in front of you first. The Zither Lord hesitated for a while, but only for 2 breaths, and said in a low voice, "There is a way, but it's very troublesome. The method of controlling the Earth Chi left by Little White can still be used. If we really use it, we can refine a lot of souls on the battlefield, at least we won't be sucked away by them again. That thing uses souls as flesh and blood. Now that there's no more flesh and blood to replenish them, they will probably become bones again in a few days." Hatred opened his mouth. It turned out that his big brother just now really planned to let this thing destroy Yunshan. He didn't know what to say for a moment. Should he say that the Zither Lord was determined and courageous, or should he say that for the sake of his own ideas, he was willing to put everything on the line? But tell me what you know first. I'll do it again. The Zither Lord said in a low voice, "Maybe this thing is as scary as you said. But because it's scary, once it can't be controlled, people with higher realms than us will also take action. Before this, it was like the mantis stalking the cicada, unaware of the oriole behind. Since I've been tricked, I might as well beat them at their own game. Let's have a fight between 2 tigers. The ancient demons and the like have been revived. The Taishang masters have to come out to manage things. This world is theirs now, but it will eventually be ours. I'm not afraid of a broken world. The more broken it is, the easier it will be to rebuild it." So Hatred realized, it turned out that he didn't really understand a lot of what his big brother, the young dragon master, said in the past. The Zither Lord said that he was only smart, and he was a little unconvinced. But after listening to what the young dragon master said, it turned out that the responsibility towards this world, he mentioned, was different from Hatred's understanding, different from anyone else's. This young dragon master really wanted the whole world. But he didn't necessarily want the people of this world. For a moment, Even a demon like him felt a slight chill in his heart. The young dragon master was indeed the young dragon master. He looked at the Zither Lord and thought silently, if he wasn't this kind of person, how could he have the willpower to treat the world as his own exclusive property? But the Fiend Lord only sneered, You'd better take care of this matter first. If you want to hear it, I'll tell you first. After you hear it, you'll want to seal it even more. But like I said, only the three of us will know. We can't let it spread to other places. Otherwise, even if I don't look for trouble with you, you won't be able to hide from the Golden Rock King. Chapter 535. The evil lord had always been a straightforward person, and she rarely tried to be mysterious. Her reminder was already a rare case of long-winded. She paused for a moment and let out a sigh. Then she continued, 50,000 years ago when Deva created the world, he created humans in his own image. But did you know that before Deva created humans, there were also rulers in this world? And these rulers were us, demons. But at that time we weren't called demons. The word demons was a derogatory term for us. It's funny that after such a long time, we still call ourselves demons. But at that time, before humans appeared, we had a name. We were called species. The moment she opened her mouth, it was as if she was going to shock them to death. But Zither Master and Hatred were not ignorant people. They knew that something that could make the evil lord so serious must be something extraordinary. Therefore Zither Master only frowned slightly. Species? In the human world, Zither Master could be considered a knowledgeable person. She snorted. That's not a good name. It's more like a term for a low-level creature. If you ask me, I like to hear about demons now. Species, what is it? Demigod. The evil lord spat out 2 words. Then she raised her hand and pointed in the direction of Cloud Mountain. That's God. Zither Master and Hatred subconsciously turned to look in that direction. At this time, the 2 skeletons were already very far away. Although they were huge, they were insignificant compared to Cloud Mountain. The sky was getting darker and the last ray of light was about to disappear. 2 dark figures were about to disappear into the darkness. But at this moment, a faint, long and mournful howl came from the sky. It was as if some unknown beast had finally seen the light of day from underground and was howling. The sound echoed in the wilderness and reached the ears of the 3 demons. It was the skeletons that were howling. This meant that they had indeed grown flesh and blood. The 3 were silent for a while because of the sound. Then Zither Master said softly, You call these things gods? He was once a god. When the Fiend Lord said this, Hatred coughed softly and said, I shall take my leave for now. Neither of the 2 dangerous great demons said anything, so Hatred immediately leaped down the hill, heading to some unknown place. They used to be gods. The Fiend Lord repeated. The demons and humanoids in the past were the descendants of gods. It was just that after that, these gods wanted to destroy the world, so they were defeated and sealed. Because of this, the human race died out. It wasn't until the celestial beings created humans that they slowly flourished, which is what we are today, the demons. Qin Jun coughed lightly. Third sister, let me remind you of 2 things. At this point, who sealed those gods? Secondly, the demons we have now are of different species. Today, a black tiger gained intelligence and attained Tao, and tomorrow, a white fox will also become a monster. Are you saying that these 2 are of the same species? The evil lord asked calmly, Do you know about demonic seeds? Demons all have demonic seeds in their bodies. The demonic seeds are the marks left by the former gods. The demonic seeds determine whether those so-called animals can attain Tao. It's not because animals attain Tao that they give birth to demonic seeds. This is because after the former gods died, they turned their supernatural powers and cultivation into demonic seeds and scattered them between heaven and earth, creating the demons today. So, no matter what they were before they attained Tao, once they attained Tao, they became humanoids and demons. Speaking of this, she raised her hand and pointed at the almost invisible skeleton. Didn't you see? All the demons' souls are embedded in their bodies. All the souls of humans are scattered into spiritual energy. That's because the demon's soul has a demon seed. It's originally a part of the ancient demon's body, or our former god's body. As for who defeated and sealed them, Pring Jun didn't tell me. He didn't know either. What the evil lord had just said was too unimaginable. Therefore, Qin Jun didn't pay much attention to it at first. He even tried to point out the mistakes and refute her. But he did see what the skeleton looked like. The demon's soul was entangled by the silk and turned into a red eyeball. The scene remained in his mind, but he really didn't know why. Therefore, at this moment he finally thought about it seriously and said, Demonic seeds. Golden Rock must have told you about them. So you want to tell me, if what you said is true, that I released them and brought them to life? Then they will want to come back to life. Since the so-called demonic seeds in the demons used to be part of them, they will want to devour all the demons in the world. Even the demonic seeds you mentioned, that still exist in the world and haven't been obtained by animals. In other words, once they do it, all demons will cease to exist, and there will no longer be any beasts that can become demons. He said all this in one breath before looking up at the evil lord. Is that so? The evil lord sighed. You are indeed smart at this time. But why did you do such an unwise thing? But these skeletons are sealed in the crypts. Qin Jun's expression became serious. And you and I both know that these crypts are used to form a formation to seal the Golden Rock King. This means that these things are not well hidden. They can be found almost easily. Look, I have found 2 of them. If they are really so terrible, why did the art saint say that she used the skeletons to form a formation or seal the skeletons in this formation? Why did she want us to pay attention to these things? This is the formation used to seal the Golden Rock King. Everyone will want to find out the truth. Did your Lord Peng tell you all these? Chao Feng's face flashed with a trace of imperceptible anger. But it disappeared in a flash. I'm afraid no one in the world can explain these things clearly. What you and I need to do is to choose some letters from them. As for the rest, we can think about it later. Qin Jun suddenly said, Fine. Then let's not dwell on these details. Third sister. Maybe I don't trust you about other things, but I know you never lie. Then I'll believe what you said about the demonic seed and God. Alright, now tell me, how do I enter the Taishang realm? It's just a possibility. The Fiend Lord looked at her. As for whether you want to try, you have to think about it carefully. You should know how the Rock King entered the Taishang realm. He obtained the Tao from the beginning. After that, he went to the Blessed Enclave to cultivate, and by chance he obtained the cultivation methods of Daotong and Kenzo. He devoted himself to cultivation and entered the Taishang realm, becoming the most powerful demon in the world. I know all this. Qin Jun interrupted her. He seemed a little impatient. It's useless. If you want me to dispel my cultivation and cultivate the Tao again, why don't you call me? What I want to say is that these are just what the Rock King wants the world to know. The Fiend Lord smiled. Only then can he hide the real secret. Qin Jun was stunned. You mean, demons can't enter the Taishang realm even if they cultivate the Tao for 100,000 years, the Fiend Lord said seriously. Remember, we are the demonic seed and we have the demonic seed in our bodies. The Tao is something that the immortals tailor-made for humans. If demons cultivate the Tao, they will only go further and further down the wrong path. Moreover, in order to keep the human cultivators in check and prevent them from having rebellious thoughts, the so-called Taishang realm that the immortals gave them is not the real Taishang realm. You should have thought of this. Once the human cultivators cultivate to a high realm, they will become like the walking dead. This is because the immortals only taught them to cultivate the body but not the mind. The Fiend Lord shook his head. The Taishang realm of the demons is the real Taishang realm. You and I are both in the mystic realm now. You should know that when we use our supernatural powers, we are no longer using spells and techniques, but controlling the laws of heaven and earth. But the real Taishang realm is not limited to controlling. This time, Qin Jun did not say a single word. He listened to every single word that the evil lord said. Then he tried to figure out if what she said was true or not. But it was obviously in vain. Every word that the Fiend Lord said was strange to him. How did his third sister know the Golden Rock King know so much? So, the Fiend Lord looked at Qin Jun's expression. The reason why Lord Rock could enter the Taishang realm was also by chance. Because, like you, he accidentally found the remains of an ancient demon. In other words, the remains of the former god that I mentioned. Because of another coincidence, he discovered that a piece of the skeleton had shattered. A very, very small piece, as fine as a speck of dust. But even that small piece wanted to swallow him. But you should know that in the end he merged with the Golden Rock King. So, he finally entered the Taishang realm. Qin Jun opened her mouth and suddenly shouted, That's it? As I said, it's possible. The Fiend Lord took 2 steps to stand beside Gao Gang and looked at the distant Cloud Mountain. The 2 of them had only talked for half an hour. The 2 skeletons had not reached the Cloud Mountain yet, but their long and mournful roars could still be heard. Qin Jun was right. Was this the so-called god? But it did not look like a god at all. It looked more like an evil ghost from the netherworld purgatory. She glanced at it and turned back to Qin Jun. Lord Rock also thought it was simple. So, he thought that if there were more than 10 Taishang experts among the demons, they would no longer need to be bullied by the Xianmen. So he wanted to use the same method to create another Taishang. But you should know the result when you see the current situation. First of all, it was extremely difficult to get the fragments from the skeleton. That thing was almost indestructible. It took him decades of effort to finally reach that point. Now try it on other fiendish demons. But at this time, no matter how small it was, even if it was smaller than when he was at that time, it was still a failure. All the demons who tried it were devoured, and not a single one succeeded. But when Lord Rock fused with the fragments, his cultivation was already at the peak of the Profound Realm. Since then, there were very few Profound Realm experts, not to mention the peak. So, there might be another possibility: those people's cultivation levels were not high enough. If they were at the peak of the Profound Realm, they might have succeeded. Speaking up to this point, she sighed. You already know what happened. I'm sleepy. You also know what to do. I'm leaving first. The topic came to an abrupt end. Qin Jun was stunned for a while before saying, What? I've said everything I need to say. I'm sleepy. The evil lord yawned. Do you want me to sleep in the wilderness? What do you mean by that? Qin Jun stared at her. You said that if they were at the peak of the Profound Realm, they might succeed. And then what? The evil lord yawned again. Her temperament was originally cold. But at this time she suddenly yawned, and suddenly appeared to be lovable and lazy. Besides, she wasn't pretending to be sleepy. She was overwhelmed with sleepiness. In just a short while, her eyes turned red as if she had just cried. Then, what then? She said vaguely, her body swaying like a willow tree in the spring wind. There are only a few people at the peak of the Profound Realm in this world. I don't want to be the master of the world, so I don't want to risk my life. No one else knows about this, so naturally there's no way to try. Speaking up to this point, she frowned. Aya, it's all your fault, so many words. I can't, I have to. She did not finish her sentence. Her body suddenly tilted and fell backward. But at the same time, somewhere behind her, or somewhere in the void, a huge pair of dark golden wings suddenly spread open, supporting and wrapping her body up. Then, the wings quickly closed and turned into an egg with feather patterns on its surface, standing quietly in the same place. Among the 9 sons of the dragons, except for Dragon 9 and Dragon 8, they all slept for a period of time every day. The higher the cultivation level, the longer the period. But when there was an emergency, they could naturally use some method to delay it, but the price was not cheap. But now, on such a battlefield, the evil lord was sleeping as usual, as if he did not care about the great danger that might be waiting for an opportunity. The Zither master looked at the egg and walked around it. Then he stopped and clicked his tongue. Sigh. It's a doting one. So that's how it is. Then, he bent down and carefully reached out his hand to lightly flick the egg. There was a crisp sound. Suddenly, an unparalleled aura and power exploded from the spot where he flicked the egg. He was so shocked that he gasped and took 3 steps back, almost tripping over the dried corpse on the ground. But since he had retreated, the aura was immediately restrained. Only then did he let out a long sigh. So fierce. But soon he frowned again. Grand Supreme. His third sister said that the Grand Supreme of the Xianmen was not the real Grand Supreme, but the Grand Supreme of the demons. He really wanted to step into this realm. However, he did not know if what he had heard was a deliberate trap, an overt plot. He also did not know what kind of realm the evil lord was talking about was the real power of the Grand Supreme. Because at least in their generation, and this referred to as long as 2,000 years, no one had seen the real Grand Supreme powerhouse in action. This real also included the Grand Supreme Sage of the Xianmen. Today's world seemed to be a world where the strong were on the decline. Chapter 536. But it was also a world where the strong rose up. Perhaps for someone like Zither Monarch, the true colors of a hero could only be seen in a chaotic world. In the end, he waved his hand and the ground beneath the egg suddenly caved in. The egg fell and was buried. Then he turned around and walked to a dense forest several dozen steps away. He first took out a treasure and concealed his aura. Then he waved his hand in front of him and an ancient scroll appeared. He felt a bit emotional after using these 2 treasures. These 2 treasures didn't belong to him but to Wanderer White. They were the magic treasures of Wanderer White when he was in Daotong and he became a ghost cultivator. This time, Wanderer White set up a formation to refine souls in the Guanyuan cave and gave him the items to control the formation. Unfortunately, Wanderer White was no longer here. This made Zither Monarch feel somewhat regretful. Everyone thought that Wanderer White was his gigolo. There were also rumors among the monster kings that Zither monarch didn't like women but liked men. But the truth was that he didn't like either of them. Wanderer White, he only liked Wanderer White's brain. Wanderer White was a ghost cultivator. Even though he had flaws such as being arrogant and conceited, his intellect was indeed outstanding. But now that Wanderer White was killed by Li Yunxin, he had lost a helper. Speaking of Li Yunxin. Alas, Li Yunxin. As the Zither master manipulated the flow of qi on the ancient scroll in a somewhat rusty manner, attempting to influence the various means that had been laid down before, and ultimately affecting the aura of the entire battlefield, he thought of Li Yunxin. That guy was actually smarter than Wanderer White. If he could become his right-hand man, he would definitely help him dominate the world. But he also knew that Li Yunxin was essentially the same kind of person as him, even though the two of them seemed to be worlds apart. He would never willingly submit to someone else. Since that was the case, he could only get rid of him. Originally, Wanderer White should have been the one to control the flow of qi. He had never cultivated before and was somewhat unfamiliar with it. Coupled with the fact that he was distracted by other things, his progress was even slower. However, his original intention was to come a little slower. For there was a rare hesitation lurking in his heart, rather like a schoolboy in the marketplace going to school. He walked slowly on the road, but he had no choice but to go. This was because he was telling the truth to hatred, and the evil lord was telling the truth to hatred as well. He told hatred that he didn't care about the demonic power refined from these dead souls. This was a heartfelt statement, because he felt dirty. Many things were dirty to him, for example, a tiny water stain on a mirror, a speck of dust on a leaf, a strand of hair on his shoulder. For example, Li Yunxin's intelligence could be used by him, but his heart was not pure. This was also dirty and mottled. So he really didn't like these things. The refined souls turned into demonic power and were absorbed into his body, causing him to become impure. This made him feel as if he was in a messy and dirty room, and it was extremely unbearable. Therefore, at this moment, although he already knew how terrifying the two skeletons were, and he knew the necessity and urgency of cutting off their source of power and restraining them, he still acted carelessly and slowly, but this was indeed his biggest sacrifice and compromise. For him, this was probably the most difficult decision, second only to his own death, and all the demons in this world will be destroyed by the skeletons. Finally, under his guidance, the flow of qi began to flow slowly. Of course, he didn't have the ability to directly change the flow of qi on this battlefield. Even a Grand Shang powerhouse couldn't do it. Although a human or a demon was strong compared to the entire earth, it was still weak. What he used was the method of moving 1,000 caddies with little effort. Spiritual qi was not evenly distributed on the earth. There were also things like undercurrents and turbulence. But such words were only used to describe it, not the actual state. In fact, although there was a qi in spiritual qi, it was not something like qi or water. At least, in Zither monarch's limited knowledge, he had never seen anything similar to spiritual qi. This kind of undercurrents and turbulence were extremely widespread and complicated. While setting up the formation, Wanderer Bai chose a few key points. Then he set up a method at these key points. Now, he only needed to activate these things. One point would lead to several points, and several points would lead to dozens of points. Finally, the flow of qi in the entire space would be changed. This was an extremely delicate and complicated process, and it required meticulous attention to detail. Perhaps it was because human cultivators could only use spiritual qi, so they were extremely sensitive to it, and it was also because they had practiced for a long time that they had reached this level. Zither monarch was a smart person. But now, even a smart person like him had the same feeling as when Li Yunxin first saw the painting saint's work in Pitfall Mountain. It was too complicated. No wonder there were so few high-level cultivators in Taoist Xianmen. No wonder cultivators could rely on formations to make up for their lack of physical strength, even though their bodies were not as strong as that of demons. No matter how slow he was, he had almost finished setting up the formation. This was the first point. There were still 3 points left. Once these 4 points were activated, the flow of qi in the entire battlefield would be reversed. At that time, it would be the same. No matter what kind of skeleton it was, whether it was a god or a demon, it would not be able to resist the power of heaven and earth. The souls of the dead would be refined. Perhaps even the souls of the dead in their bodies, if they were not strong enough, would be refined. At that time they would turn back into skeletons, and Zither monarch would probably have to consider the next matter. That was, whether or not he believed what the evil spirit said. If he believed it, should he try it like the Golden Rock King? In fact, he wanted to hear the Golden Rock King narrate what happened in person. all the details and key points of that time. Maybe the evil spirit only heard it in general, or maybe there were other tricks. He began to let his imagination run wild again, and did not proceed to the last step, to inject his own demon power into the ancient scroll in front of him and activate this point. But at this time he suddenly heard a faint sound. Must be a small demon. There were originally hundreds of thousands of demons on the battlefield. Most of them died, but there were always a few that escaped. The hundreds of thousands of scattered was also a very large number. Maybe it was the brave ones. After all, there were many armors on the battlefield. There were many treasures among them. Or maybe it was coming back, but he soon realized that he was wrong. It was a woman dressed in white. She walked cautiously in the forest, listening carefully for any movement around her, as if she was afraid of being seen. But Zither Monarch had concealed her aura before setting up this formation. So even if this person was Bai Yunxin, who had returned to the mysterious realm and was at her peak, she would not be able to discover him. Zither Monarch frowned slightly. Of course he knew about Bai Yunxin. Bai Yunxin was not one of the most powerful demons in the world, but she was undoubtedly one of the most famous. Everyone knew that her feather robe had been taken away by the mysterious sect, and that she had asked for it many times without success. He also knew that she was the adopted daughter of the Golden Rock King. In fact, in a sense, according to the secular world, she and the evil spirit should be sisters. He wondered what would happen when his third sister saw Bai Yunxin. Thinking of this, Zither Monarch blinked again. Bai Yunxin was still engaged to the dragons. It seemed that the Golden Rock King did not want to participate in the battle between the demons and the mysterious sect, so he made a sacrifice in this way so that he could stay out of it. The marriage between different kinds of demons, once the female demon was pregnant, she would die. Maybe in a sense this was also a way to show his love for the evil spirit? Zither Monarch knew that unlike the other dragon's son, his third sister, the evil spirit, was actually very close to her father, the Golden Rock King. He did not know what Bai Yunxin was looking for tonight. He watched her walk slowly, getting closer and closer to the place where the evil spirit was sleeping. If the evil spirit woke up and saw his sister, he did not know what would happen. But now Zither Monarch had something important to do. Earlier the skeleton had tried to swallow him. Although he tried to resist, he was also seriously injured. 80 to 90% of his demon power had been absorbed. Bai Yunxin's character was not easy to get along with. If there was a conflict, it would be troublesome. Therefore he did not want to pay attention to her. He would only open the eye of the array after she passed by. But Bai Yunxin stopped at the place where he buried the egg. Zither Monarch frowned suspiciously and let out a soft sound of surprise. Then he saw Bai Yunxin move her hands apart. The soil and rocks were separated by an invisible force, revealing the egg underneath. Seeing this, Zither Monarch almost cried out. He and the evil spirit, the dragons, had been sleeping for a long time. For example, what happened to the evil spirit tonight was not impossible. Therefore, almost all of them had their own treasures. For example, the evil spirit's wings and hatred's golden palace, to prevent themselves from being discovered when they were sleeping and to avoid dangerous situations. Logically speaking, if one did not know the location beforehand, no one should be able to find the evil spirit's egg. How did Bai Yunxin know? Could it be that she had been hiding nearby and neither he nor the evil spirit noticed? How could this be possible? He was shocked and he almost attacked. But he suddenly noticed Bai Yunxin's expression. Her expression was a little complicated. It seemed to be anxious, sad and helpless, but there was no killing intent. Strange. He spat out these two words from his heart. Bai Yunxin jumped into the pit and knocked on the egg 3 times. Zither Monarch was slightly stunned by these 3 knocks. This was the first time he had seen the evil spirit's treasure. But because he had heard of it for a long time, he could not help but touch it, and was shocked. But now that Bai Yunxin had knocked on his door, nothing had happened. The next moment, something even more shocking happened. The egg was knocked open by Bai Yunxin. 2 huge, dark golden wings slowly opened up and the evil spirit was revealed. At this moment, his third sister opened her eyes and stared blankly at Bai Yunxin for a while. Then she opened her mouth and said something. Because of the pair of wings, he could not hear anything. He could only see the 2 of them. And it was nighttime and the light was dim. Even if Zither Monarch tried to read their lips, he could only vaguely understand some broken words. But the words he read were enough to make him stunned. These 2 seemed to know each other a long time ago. And they seemed to be very close. Because Zither Monarch saw that the first thing the evil spirit said when she woke up was, "What's wrong?" This meant that she was not surprised by Yunshin's arrival and the fact that she was able to find her. Then, a thought suddenly struck his consciousness, causing his expression to change greatly. The evil spirit actually woke up, and she was herself. Because from the words that the evil spirit said next, he realized that she was still herself, not someone else. But the problem was, she should not be herself now. Li Yunshin died on the battlefield in front of the two armies. At that time, the evil spirit was the closest to him. His dragon soul should have possessed the evil spirit after his death. Previously, the evil spirit said that he was sleepy, but he insisted on saying a few more words because he wanted to see Li Yunshin appear like Dragon Jiao who had possessed Hatred's body, so that he could say a few words. But now, the dragon soul was not with her. There were only two possibilities. One was that the dragon soul that Li Yunshin had obtained was not the real dragon soul, so he was dead. The second possibility was that Li Yunshin was not dead. When he thought of this, Zither Monarch's heart skipped a beat. He did not know whether it was because of disappointment, surprise, or a little bit of relief. But the doubt about Li Yunshin's life and death did not bother him for too long. Soon, Zither Monarch saw Yunshin suddenly cry like a little girl, wiping her eyes with her sleeves, sobbing and shaking her body slightly as if she was acting like a spoiled child. This scene almost made Zither Monarch's eyes fall out. She was a big demon of the Xian realm. Rumor had it that she was arrogant, violent, and temperamental, but the next moment he saw the evil spirit who was usually cold and murderous suddenly reach out and gently embrace Yunshin, patting her on the back. There was a gentle look on his face, as if he was comforting her. And what they were talking about, what Zither Monarch saw, was Li Xianyu? He said, I left Mount Yunshan. Then he saw the evil spirit frown. Li Xianyu really? Okay. Since he... Then it was at this moment that Yunshin cried, I don't want to. There is no one else. I want him. The person they were talking about was Li Yunshin. Without a doubt. From their conversation, Zither Monarch deduced that Li Yunshin was not dead, and was now in Mount Yunshan. It seemed that Red Madam also had an adventure in Mount Yunshan, and even made the Xian realm demon suffer a loss. These things were unimaginable to him. But if these things were related to the three words Li Yunshin, it was not impossible. How did he do it? Not only did it mean that he was not dead, but also, how did Yunshin become like this? When did Yunshin and his third sister get together? He suddenly had a feeling. A moment ago, it seemed that the whole world was under his control. But in the next moment, he realized that he was surrounded by fog. Chapter 537. He knew that he would be able to get more information from these two demonesses. But things didn't go as he wished. Yunshin cried and turned around. So the evil lord turned around to talk to her. This time he couldn't see anything. But they didn't talk for long. After about 8 or 9 sentences, the two of them left together. After another 15 minutes, the Zither Lord slowly showed himself. He couldn't detect the evil lords and Yunshin's auras anymore. He was sure that the two of them had left. Strange. How did these two demonesses get together? Even though the Zither Lord prided himself on his intelligence, he couldn't guess this kind of thing. He thought for a while. He concluded that no matter how the two demonesses felt about Li Yunshin, at least for the time being, they wouldn't cause him any trouble. They were talking about love. It must be known that love was the most torturous and exhausting thing. He actually hoped that Li Yunshin would fall in love and be unable to extricate himself. Since that was the case, he decided to put it aside for now and focus on the matter at hand. The Zither Lord took a deep breath and finally dropped his hand from the ancient scroll. When the formation was activated, the chi of heaven and earth was affected. It spread from one point to several points, and from several points to more than 10 points. Thousands of lines were triggered, and finally the flow of spiritual energy in the area was changed. Spiritual energy couldn't be seen or touched. If one wasn't a cultivator or a yin god, they wouldn't be able to sense its existence. But at this moment he could clearly see the changes in heaven and earth. It was late at night. Because the battle during the day had stirred up a large amount of smoke and dust into the sky, there was no moon tonight and dark clouds were pressing down heavily from the sky. But after the Zither Lord triggered the formation, light began to appear under the clouds. It was as if thousands of colorful snakes of light were dancing wildly, emitting a breathtaking radiance. The Zither Lord had seen a similar scene in the extreme north. The locals called them the Aurora Lights. But now not only was the sky bright, even the ground was lit up. It was as if countless fireflies were flying up from the ground, and the specks of light plated the ground with a layer of silver brilliance. If these lights didn't appear on the hellish battlefield, but on a peaceful spring night, summer night, autumn night, or winter night, it would be a beautiful scene in a dream. But now it only made people's hearts turn cold. The corpses and flesh piled up on the battlefield had already been hidden by the night. But this light made them appear again, and they looked even more terrifying. The array formation could indeed operate. Wanderer Bai's efforts did not go to waste. The power gained from this should have belonged to hatred. However, the evil lord's words made the Zither lady realize that the matter was urgent and could not be delayed any longer. Therefore, this power that hatred wanted but did not want, could only be endured by him in the end. Since it had already begun, a quarter of an hour later, Zither Master activated the remaining 3 formations. The entire wasteland began to operate, and the spiritual power began to circulate wildly. The principle behind this formation was actually very simple. Dead souls were like flying insects that had phototaxis. They also liked to gather in places with rich spiritual energy. In the secular world, people often said that certain places were heavy with yin qi, or heavy with evil qi. Most of them referred to places with dense spiritual energy that were coincidentally discovered by people. As a result, whenever there were wandering ghosts, they liked to gather there and bring disaster to people. Now that the formation was completed, it would choose a few from the countless channels of spiritual energy in the wasteland. Through the principle of pulling one hair will affect the whole body, it used ingenious methods to create a butterfly effect at certain key points. Finally, the remaining channels of spiritual energy would change their direction and converge into the selected channels in a very short period of time. Thus, the 10,000 streams returned to the origin. In the end, the spiritual energy in this vast space would be concentrated and become extremely dense. The ghosts would be attracted by the spiritual energy and follow it like moths to a flame. When they reached the Guanyuan crypt, they would be refined into demonic power through the formation and converge into Zither Master's body. The reason why he said he was not sure if he could do it was because many of the ghosts had been absorbed by the skeletons. He didn't know if this part could be removed from their bodies again. These ghosts were like minced meat attached to the skeletons. But they were still in the early stages and did not have the protection of thicker muscles and pliable skin. Perhaps there was still hope. At this moment, Zither Master stood at the edge of Manwan Mountain, sensing the turbulent flow of spiritual energy on the battlefield. Very quickly, almost visibly, the ghosts began to move. At first, tens of thousands of ghosts were sacrificed to the 2 skeletons. Then they uncontrollably walked up the mountain. Wherever they went, the ghosts madly gathered and another tens of thousands were refined. However, this battle had almost exhausted the vitality of the demons and cultivators, and the number of lives lost was uncountable. Even so, the sea of ghosts in the wasteland was still boundless. There were probably still 100,000 of them. Originally, these ghosts were following the footsteps of the skeletons. But now, they were slowly dispersing as if they were being washed away by something. They began to cover the entire battlefield again. About 10 breaths later, they could see the streams of ghosts formed by the spiritual energy. They began to move in the direction of Manwan Mountain. At this moment, Zither Master heaved a sigh of relief. Although the skeletons were strong, they were not strong enough to resist the chi of heaven and earth. However, when he looked closer, he saw an anomaly. This close was relative to the 2 skeletons. In fact, they were still more than 10 miles away from where he was standing. What was unusual was that right there, some souls split up and went straight into the forest. Although it was only a trickle compared to the several tides that his formation had triggered, it was still a considerable amount. In the short time that he had been paying attention, hundreds of ghosts had already gone into the forest. If he did not see it, he was afraid that when his formation was completed, thousands of ghosts would be diverted. If it were thousands of mortal souls, perhaps only demons that had just taken human form would be interested in them. But these thousands were the souls of demons and cultivators. The spiritual energy was more than 1,000 times thicker than that of mortals. These thousands of ghosts were probably equivalent to the millions of ghosts that Li Yunxin borrowed from Bai Yanjun in Wei City. His brows furrowed as he thought of something. Someone once said that they had seen 2 ghost kings in Manwan Mountain. One was the former Emperor Li and the other was the former Emperor Yi. After all, he and hatred had the idea of killing the emperors of various countries and turning them into yin spirits to disperse the power of Shenmen. They did not care about these 2 ghosts. But looking at the situation now, there was no doubt that the 2 ghost emperors were playing tricks and wanted to take the opportunity to get a share. Zither Master snorted coldly. At this time, if the two ghost emperors came to beg him to submit, not to mention thousands of ghosts, even if he gave them tens of thousands, so what? After all, he was already at the peak of the Shenmen realm. After he recovered his strength, the benefits of demon power were limited. But they came to steal without saying a word. This method was very dirty. It would take some time for the ghosts to be gathered in the Guanyuan cave in Manwan Mountain and then refined into demon power. Zither Master pointed his foot and flew in that direction. His guess was right. The ones who did this were Emperor Li and Emperor Yi. Before Li Yunxin left Manwan Mountain and traveled with the Qing army, he had met these two ghost emperors. At that time, they invited him to their netherworld, which was actually a ruined temple with thousands of ghosts gathered inside. Emperor Li said that his wish was to build a ghostly world where he could judge people's good and evil, and he would be the judge. At that time he asked Li Yunxin to help him. From this, it could be seen that although Emperor Li's realm was high, he was at the peak of the Shenmen realm like Zither Master before he was seriously injured. He was not as good at judging people as Zither Master. At least Zither Master knew that people like Li Yunxin would never be willing to be under someone, much less help someone. At that time, Li Yunxin had asked Emperor Li what kind of adventure he had to have such a magical power that could take in ghosts. Emperor Li pretended to be mysterious and only said that if Li Yunxin could help him, he would be willing to tell him. What did Li Yunxin not dare to say? He said that he would wait for 10 days. 10 days later he would kill most of the demons and Shenmen cultivators. At that time the two ghost emperors could come out and collect the ghosts. At that time, Emperor Li only thought that he was talking nonsense. But today when the rain of fire fell from the sky, now Emperor Li was truly shocked. Whether this was done by Li Yunxin himself or he predicted it, it was all right. There were remnant souls all over the mountain. They were remnant souls of demons and cultivators. Compared to the mortal souls that the two of them had collected before, they didn't know how much stronger they were. They were not from Long Sun's demon camp, nor were they cultivators of Shenmen realm. Seeing these ghosts they didn't feel sad at all. They were only happy. But they also knew that these things were treasures in their eyes and also in the eyes of others. Therefore, when they saw the big formation working, they just wanted to get a small piece of the pie. Unexpectedly, Zither Master had good eyesight and saw it immediately. The dilapidated temple that Emperor Li and Emperor Yi led Li Yunxin to see had been repaired. Those who were not in the know would think that it was a temple in the secular world that was flourishing with incense. The two ghost emperors sat on the throne in the middle of the temple, accepting the worship of thousands of ghosts. Emperor Li seemed to be overjoyed. He grinned and said, "Brother, you're right. That Li Yunxin is capable. Now that the evil sects in the world have been purged, it's a good chance for us to achieve something great. I think there are only 3 heroes in the world. You, me, and that Li Yunxin is one." Emperor Yi was about to be humble when he said this. Suddenly, he heard an extremely pleasant female voice from outside the temple snorting coldly, "Two wandering ghosts. How dare you say that others are evil sects?" The two ghost emperors' expressions changed. Emperor Li frowned. He turned into a gust of black wind and rushed out. He shouted, "Where is this girl? She doesn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. She dares to come to my ghost country and talk nonsense." Chapter 538. When he came out of the temple he was aggressive and loud. As soon as he landed, a gust of cold wind spread out behind him, and thick black fog gushed out from the temple gate. In the black fog, ferocious ghost soldiers and ghost generals were faintly discernible, holding swords, spears and sticks, as if they were his personal guards. When he landed and looked up, Emperor Li could not help but be stunned. Although dark clouds covered the city tonight, the operation of the formation had caused a strange light, so the sky was still clear. His small temple was hidden in a patch of grass in the dense forest. And now, at the edge of this grassland on a low hill, stood a white-clothed woman against the sunlight. She was dressed in white. She seemed to be afraid of the cold autumn, so she added a thick cloak with white fur edges. Her face was covered with fur, making her look especially delicate and lovely. She was quite tall among women, even as tall as Emperor Li. Although she did not have any makeup on her face, her eyebrows were like a painting. She put her hands behind her back, slightly raised her face and looked at the ghost emperor. She looked very heroic. The emperor of the Li kingdom was a true genius when he was alive. Other small monarchs might consider the checks and balances of nobles during marriage, so they had to accept some ordinary women as concubines. However, the emperor of the Li kingdom had absolute power, and no one was worthy of him considering the checks and balances. Therefore, his favorite concubines in the harem were all chosen according to his temperament. All of them were outstanding beauties and talented. But he liked women. As an emperor for 46 years, he had seen countless women and never got tired of it. But because of this, there was a type of woman that he had never tried, those unruly heroines. In fact, there were some in the past. But when he really met one, they were either deliberately pretending to please him. Naturally, he could tell at a glance, and then he felt that it was not interesting. Or they were really loyal to their chastity. But this was only a temporary novelty. If they were loyal to their chastity for a long time, they would rather die than submit, so he could only grant them death. It was also boring. There was a new world after becoming a ghost, so he wanted to try female demons. But when he really thought about it, he realized that the legends he heard when he was alive were all lies. In the legends, there were always beautiful banshees, but now that he had seen them with his own eyes, he knew that there were not that many beautiful banshees in the world. Not to mention that there were very few banshees. Even if they did, their taste was strange. For example, when a female demon transforms into human form, her eyes are extremely beautiful. That pair of eyes took up half of his face, making him look frightening. There were also those who considered being thin to be beautiful, but they were so thin that their hands and feet looked like sticks of firewood. Some even preferred a high-nose bridge, just like a vulture. Some liked pale faces, so they were as pale as ghosts. Although each of these appearances had their own preferences, there was nothing to be said if they felt comfortable looking at them. However, Emperor Li didn't like it at all. He wasn't Li Yunxin, and there were always beautiful women coming to him. Perhaps it was because he had been too dissolute as a human, and his luck as a ghost had been exhausted. But now that he saw this woman, he was instantly stunned. Needless to say, she was one of the most beautiful demons. Even among the concubines in his harem when he was alive, she was extremely outstanding. If it was just his appearance, it was nothing much. Then listen to her voice, a low and gentle voice of a woman. Perhaps some men wouldn't like it, but to Emperor Li, it was like music to his ears. This female demon dared to speak arrogantly to him, which showed that her strength couldn't be underestimated. Such a woman with beauty, strength, and temperament was exactly what Emperor Li had been yearning for all this time. So after being stunned, his tone softened. Which fairy demon queen is here? It was none other than the Zither Master. When Emperor Li became a ghost emperor, his cultivation was already at the peak of the mystic realm, similar to the Zither Master. But the Zither Master didn't want to compete with him, he was just a new ghost cultivator. Then he learned that he was chased by the cultivators of the mystic sect, and his cultivation was greatly damaged. Then he appeared in the Manwan Mountains. According to the demons who saw him, Emperor Li's cultivation had not recovered, and he looked like he was only in the true realm. So he ignored him. Because of this, when he found out that someone was here, he flew over. Unexpectedly, the Zither Master was a little surprised when Emperor Li appeared. He didn't know what evil martial arts this ghost emperor practiced. It had only been a few days, but now he seemed to have regained the power of the mystic realm, and his injuries had healed, and he had advanced by leaps and bounds. Unfortunately, he was also injured before. His current situation was similar to that of the ghost emperor, he was only in the mystic realm. Even if they fought, he might not have the upper hand. So he was originally standing on the mountain waiting for a sentence to provoke him, and then he would kill him. But now that he saw him, he couldn't do it. He also saw that Emperor Li's expression changed when he saw him, and his tone became stuttering. He couldn't help but despise him, he was just a mortal in the past. Mortals' habits couldn't be changed even if they became ghosts. So he snorted. He raised his chin and sneered, "Is this Lord's name something you can ask?" He knew that the array was running, and the souls would be refined by the Guanyuan cave, and then the demon power would flow into his body. At that time, the power might not be enough for him to return to the peak of the mystic realm in a short time, but it was more than enough to control Emperor Li. Now that the two met, if he left immediately, he was afraid that he would be seen through, and it would be troublesome. He said this in an unfriendly tone. If it was some other hot-tempered demon king, he would have lost his temper immediately. Unexpectedly for Emperor Li, it was like a tickle on his flesh. He wished he could quickly hold this beauty in his arms and play with her. It would be interesting to see her resist like a little beast. Thinking of this, his eyes revealed a lustful light. Poor Li Yunxin, when he first saw Emperor Li, felt that he was extraordinary and unfathomable. If he saw how he behaved in front of this beauty now, what would he think? Emperor Li chuckled and said, "That's right. A little beauty like you must not be an ordinary demon. But do you know that I am not an ordinary vulgar person? Not only am I more understanding than those demons, but I am also good at taking off people's clothes. I even know things like beauty washing clothes, human face peach blossom, men plow and women weave, the harmony of the zither, the shallow bottom of the fish. When he was a human he was arrogant. After becoming a ghost, due to his obsession he became even more unrestrained and preposterous. At this moment, looking at the souls running into his ghost country, and a beauty from his dreams being sent to him, how many people in the world could have such a joyous moment? His mouth became more and more open. As he said this, Emperor Yi in the temple couldn't take it anymore. He turned into a black wind and flew out of the temple. He revealed his human form and coughed, "Brother, your words are too sudden." Emperor Li hadn't traveled for a long time, and now that he was talking excitedly he waved his hands. "Hey brother's words are wrong. This is just fun." What he said, beauty washing clothes, human face peach blossom, etc. were names of the positions of men and women intercourse in the mortal world. The Zither ruler wasn't a dumb demon that hid in the wilderness. Although he hadn't heard of these things, looking at Emperor Li he knew most of it. Anger surged in his heart. This Emperor Li really didn't know his place. He had only been a ghost cultivator for a few months. He didn't even know what was going on in the demon world and he was already so arrogant. He probably felt that he was the most powerful person in the world and no one was his match. Before this he wanted to subdue him. But now he was filled with terrifying killing intent. Once that demonic energy was refined, he would destroy him in both body and soul with a single palm strike. Who knew that while he was furious, Emperor Li saw her frowning and angry expression, and his lust grew. As the saying goes, newborn calves aren't afraid of tigers. He had just become a ghost emperor, how would he know how deep the waters were? Unable to restrain himself any longer, he stretched out a pair of eagle claw-like hands and pounced towards the Zither lady, impatiently calling out, "Little beauty, I see that you are especially pitiful, let me take good care of you." He was so daring. Not only was Emperor Yi shocked, even Zither monarch was shocked. After so many years, who dared to court death in front of him? The demonic energy in the cave would be completely refined in another 15 minutes. The Zither master was so angry that she laughed. She waved her hands and shouted, "What a reckless fool! This lord will end you right now." Hearing this, the ghost emperor shouted in the air again, "Good, good, good. Ah, why don't you call me dead ghost? It sounds more intimate." As soon as the voice fell, the two people's unparalleled palm strength had already blasted into one place. There was a loud bang. Except for the temple that was refined by the monster power, everything within a radius of a few miles was destroyed. Two great demons in the Shen realm. The Zither ruler attacked angrily and used all her strength. Although the ghost emperor was lustful, he wasn't completely bewitched. He knew that the beauty in front of him was a wild horse and he had to deal with her properly. Thus this attack was earth-shattering. Even Emperor Yi, who was in the true realm, was almost swept away by the strong wind and violent spiritual energy. After this attack, both of them were slightly shocked. The Zither ruler was shocked that the ghost emperor's palm strength was slightly above his. He had used all his strength and made up his mind to kill the ghost emperor. The ghost emperor was shocked that the girl was really so strong. Although he was heavily injured, as he said to Li Yunxin, he had a fortuitous encounter after being injured and quickly recovered his cultivation. He wanted to injure and capture the ghost emperor in one blow, but who knew that they were evenly matched? The Zither ruler was shocked and angry. Emperor Li's shock turned into a pleasant surprise. The two of them crossed each other. The ghost emperor laughed strangely and pounced forward bravely again, shouting, "Strong, strong. Only a girl like you is worthy of me." He was fierce and full of fighting spirit. The Zither ruler couldn't dodge and had to take another blow. This time she was at a disadvantage. Although the powerful palm force pushed both of them back, the emperor was unharmed, but the Zither ruler panicked. His foundation was injured. He was the first dragon's son, the young master, a great demon at the peak of the Shen realm and recently the leader of all the demons in the world. But now he was like a tiger that had fallen to the plains. He was not a defeated dog but a ferocious tiger. Seeing that he was about to lose, the emperor's fighting spirit grew stronger. He didn't even give the Zither ruler a chance to breathe and pounced forward again. Although he looked ridiculous now, he was not stupid. He knew that the demons who had been around for many years must have some magical treasures to help them. The only thing he could rely on was his powerful demonic energy. Thus, he couldn't give the opponent a chance to breathe or use a magical weapon. After another round of fierce attacks, the zither lady was clearly unable to hold on any longer. At this time he could say his name, maybe the name Zither ruler Chionyo could make this arrogant fool retreat. But he had always been a proud person. If he said it now, wouldn't it mean that he knew he was not as good as the opponent and wanted to use his name to suppress the opponent? If this spread, who would listen to him in the future? Therefore he gritted his teeth and endured Emperor Li's vulgar words to deal with him. Once the demonic energy in the Guanyuan cave was refined and injected into his body, he would be killed. No, he would be captured and tortured for 100 years. Thus the two of them fought and walked. Unknowingly they were out of the Manwan Mountains and on the battlefield. However, although Emperor Li had the upper hand, he also wanted to retreat. This was because the plains were currently empty, and the two of them were fighting with great momentum. This place was not like the Manwan Mountains where it was easy to be discovered. He thought he could capture the girl in a quarter of an hour. Who knew that the little wild horse was so fierce that he could not do anything to him for a while. He also knew that although the demons had been defeated, there must be many demons like this beauty who stayed on the battlefield to observe the situation. If the two of them really fought until they were exhausted, wouldn't it be a good thing for others to take advantage of? With this thought, the two of them crossed their palms again. Emperor Li flew back another 30 feet and laughed. Good, good, good. I love your temperament. But I am not a person who does not know how to cherish women. Look at you now, how can I have the heart to chase you? You can go today. After I settle this matter in the future. Hee, I will look for you again and have fun. It was at this time that the soul in the Guanyuan cave was refined. The Zither ruler could almost feel the surging power, like a huge wave of a tsunami rushing into his body. His power skyrocketed. At this moment, the demonic energy in his body, which was originally isolated from the surrounding heaven and earth, connected with this wave. This spiritual energy came so violently that he could not break it even if he wanted to. It was just like breaking a hole in the dam in his body and letting in some water. But once the monstrous water rushed in, how could the dam be blocked? It would have to pour out all of it. Only a demon at the peak of the Shen realm like him would dare to use this method to receive such power. If his cultivation was lower, he would probably explode and die before he could receive all the spiritual energy. The Zither ruler's momentum rose to the peak in an instant. Just now he was bedridden for several days without eating or drinking, but now it was as if he had carefully recuperated for a whole month and his energy was at its peak. The first dragon's son suppressed all the anger in his heart at this moment and his heart was as calm as still water. Facing a person who was about to die, what was there to be angry about? He sneered and said in a low voice, "Go? I am also excited about the battle today, but I don't want to go." Instead of retreating, he charged forward, raised his palms and attacked Emperor Li with a thunderous momentum. Previously, Emperor Li had used this method to force him to retreat. Now he was going to give him a taste of his own medicine, to crush him with his palms. His spirit, chi and spirit were all refreshed. In the eyes of Emperor Li, there was an indescribable attraction. And then he sneered. Emperor Li was a little dazed, but in the blink of an eye, the beauty really threw herself at him. Since this was the case, how could he show weakness? He also shouted, "Good. I will play with you again." And he also went up to her. But, at this moment, a terrible change, a change that could not be detected by the naked eye and only the Zither ruler could feel, happened. The spiritual chi reversed. The spiritual chi on the whole battlefield, including the spiritual chi in the Guanyuan crypt, began to reverse. It was as if a strong, invisible giant hand had twisted the battlefield. Therefore, the spiritual energy that was originally flowing towards Guanyuan's crypt and Zither lady's body was now flowing in the opposite direction. Instead, it was rushing towards Yunshan's location. This change happened in an instant. And at this time, the demonic power in the Zither ruler's body was mixed with the demonic power from the Guanyuan crypt. Once the huge flow of spiritual chi reversed, the demonic power in her body was also sucked out. The demonic power in her body was full a moment ago, but in the next moment she was almost drained. This terrible reversal not only took away the demonic power, but also caused terrible damage to her internal organs and meridians. As a result, the Zither ruler fainted in the air before she could even make a sound. She fell into the arms of Emperor Li. Even the ghost emperor was stunned. How could he expect such a change? He could not stop his palms in time, and with a bang, his palms hit the Zither ruler's body, sending her flying far away and spraying out a large amount of golden blood in the air. Immediately after, he let out a heart-wrenching cry as his body shot forward like lightning, hurriedly catching the Zither master who looked like a broken doll in his arms. Aya! What a beauty! How would Jin know that you like to play this kind of game of resisting and welcoming? I regret it so much. It hurts so much. But after shouting this, his expression suddenly became serious. He did not feel it before, but now he felt it. Not only did he feel it, but he could also see it. In fact, what he saw now, the Zither ruler had also seen before, the wildly dancing lights in the sky. At that time, the Zither ruler thought that it was because he activated the formation set up by Wanderer Bai that the strange lights appeared. But if Wanderer Bai was still alive, he would have told him otherwise. Moreover, it was different from the Zither ruler who was not proficient in formations. Wanderer Bai should have been able to see some clues from the lights. After the Zither ruler activated the formation and started to refine the souls, someone used an even more brilliant method to change the earthly chi in this space. It was different from Wanderer Bai's formation, which was 4 tails to move 1,000 caddies. That person's method was simpler, more powerful, and more violent. He directly reshaped them. At this moment, the lights in the sky showed the shapes of mountains and rivers, and they were constantly changing. It was as if someone was fiddling with them like toys. Chapter 539. The range of this phenomenon was so vast, and the changes were so violent that anyone, including those who had fled in all directions and were still wandering in the mountains, those who had already bid farewell to Cloud Mountain and were about to leave, and even those wandering souls who had fled in all directions, could see and feel it. At this time, the changes in the chi of heaven and earth were so violent that it had seriously affected everyone who had dense spiritual energy in their bodies. In other words, any human who had cultivated before and any demon who could transform into human form would be affected. One must know that the demonic energy and spiritual energy in one's body were sealed from the outside world. But there were always many entrances and exits that allowed people to communicate with the chi of heaven and earth when they used their demonic energy and spiritual energy. Therefore, whether it was humans or demons, the chi of heaven and earth were inextricably linked. The reason why Zither Monarch was seriously injured was because she opened the door in her body and accepted the violent demonic energy, resulting in a sudden backlash. Now, although these people and demons were not in the same special situation as Zither Monarch, their auras also underwent a drastic change under the influence of the chi of heaven and earth. In other words, the auras in these people's bodies were also in disorder. This disorder didn't have too much of an effect on high-level demons and cultivators. They could slowly adjust their breathing. The so-called effect was only when they used demonic energy and spiritual energy to perform magical abilities. The failure rate would increase to a terrifying level. However, for low-level demons and cultivators, it could only mean one thing: cultivation deviation. Since ancient times, this word was one of the main causes of death for cultivators and demons. Although cultivators had the experience of their predecessors and the protection of their sects, the techniques they practiced were extremely complicated. If they were not careful, they would be met with misfortune. Although demons didn't practice techniques, it was precisely because of this that if the aura in their body was circulating in the wrong direction, they would be in a situation of certain death. As a result, the surviving cultivators had no way to escape. A large number of low-level cultivators immediately showed signs of death. They had to stop where they were to regulate their breathing and ask the cultivators with higher cultivation to protect them. The low-level fiendish demons hiding in the mountains were not as lucky. They immediately fainted. Screams filled the mountains. Only now did they realize that there were so many people hiding in this seemingly dead area. At this moment, if someone opened his eye, he would see the souls of the dead that covered the mountains and the demon power that was refined from Guan Yuan's crypt rushing towards the Cloud Mountain. When Wanderer White's great formation was operating, it drove the souls that hadn't been absorbed by the 2 skeletons to Manwan Mountain, but it was powerless against the flesh and blood that had already formed on their bodies. However, when the chi of heaven and earth changed, even the fibers and the tiny eyeballs between the fibers were destroyed to the point of being unstable. Finally, they began to slowly fall down. It was as if the things attached to the surface of the 2 skeletons had begun to decay and decay. This caused a layer of gray fog to appear around the 2 skeletons. Those things formed this fog. The skeleton paused for a moment. The huge limbs emitted a long hoarse sound as if it was being squeezed by rust. The power peeling off from their bodies seemed to make them feel uneasy. This uneasiness then turned into anger. The skeleton sped up towards Cloud Mountain. It was as if it wanted to take back all the power from that place. At this time they were actually very close to the Cloud Mountain. If they sped up again, it would only take them a dozen breaths to reach the foot of the mountain. Looking at it this way, the mountain looked like a mushroom and the 2 skeletons looked like 2 ants. But no one would doubt the power of these two ants. When everyone was affected by the chaotic chi, they seemed to be even more excited. The skeleton raised its arms. The first hit landed on the mountain wall. The movements of the two skeletons were surprisingly consistent, as if they were two bodies controlled by the same thought. 4 fists bombarded the mountain with terrifying power, producing a rumbling sound like muffled thunder. There was a prohibition around Cloud Mountain. When Li Yunxin wanted to enter Cloud Mountain, he had to die again because he couldn't get around the prohibition. The prohibition would channel powerful spiritual power into the intruder's body, causing him to explode. But for these skeletons, not only did the prohibition not become a prohibition, but it also became the source of their power. So the prohibition seemed to be turned off. The skeleton's fists directly hit the surface of Cloud Mountain. It was like a person hitting a thick old mattress with his hand. A cloud of dust rose from the surface of Cloud Mountain. But just like the dust it stirred up when it fell, those things were actually made of rather large boulders. But such a blow was no different from scratching an itch for Cloud Mountain. The huge mountain didn't even tremble, and the surging spiritual power was still gathering in the mountain. The spiritual power was like the wind that whistled past the two skeletons. It was what they dreamed of, but they couldn't touch it or grab it. But it seemed that because they were getting closer to Cloud Mountain, the things that made up their flesh and blood collapsed more and more. Before this, it was just a faint gray cloud of dust. But now, they were like Long Sun who was summoning the rain in clouds. The two huge bodies were shrouded in thick black fog, and their silhouettes couldn't be seen clearly. Seeing this, Emperor Li hugged the Guqingjun, whose limbs were hanging limply in his arms. He was stunned for a while and frowned. He muttered to himself, "Strange, strange." Previously when he fought with the Guqingjun it was extremely shocking. Only when the storm subsided did Emperor Yi dare to show himself. He turned into a gust of black wind and swept to Emperor Li's side. He saw the person in Emperor Li's arms and was shocked. "Brother Ji Yu." Emperor Li came back to his senses. He glanced at the beauty in his arms. Her face was pale and her breathing was extremely weak. Half of her hair was untied, hanging down like a black cloud, covering half of her face. Her eyes were tightly closed. Her long, butterfly-like eyelashes cast a shadow on her snow-white face. She had smeared blood on her mouth, but it wasn't black and red, but golden. Under the glow of the sky, it glowed faintly, adding to her demonic charm. Seeing this, Emperor Li was heartbroken. I didn't know what she was thinking and I was too excited. I actually hurt her. It hurt so much, it hurts so much. Her feelings? Emperor Yi frowned, not understanding. What feelings does she have? Emperor Li didn't say more. He looked up at Yunshan. "Brother Liu, let me ask you, look at the huge commotion over there. Who did it?" Emperor Li's thoughts were erratic and Emperor Yi couldn't keep up. Before he could answer, Emperor Li said, "Tell me, is it Li Yunxin who did it?" Emperor Yi seemed to be in a daze tonight. He didn't know how to answer every question Emperor Li asked. For example, today, he did tell Emperor Li about Li Yunxin's abilities. But when he met him in the Manwan Mountain, Emperor Li looked down on Li Yunxin. It wasn't until today that Emperor Li's impression of him changed. Just as he had said, almost everyone was dead. Although Emperor Li was a supreme, he had the demeanor of a hero in the pugilistic world. Once he approved of someone, he wouldn't hesitate to praise him. Emperor Yi didn't think that Li Yunxin was responsible for the earth-shattering commotion. When he met Li Yunxin in the Manwan Mountain, Li Yunxin was still in the true realm. How could a fiendish demon of the true state do something like this? But Emperor Yi and Li Yunxin had a good relationship. In fact, he might even be one of the few fiendish demons who had the deepest friendship with him among all the fiendish demons in the world. Thus he couldn't retort. He wanted to speak but Emperor Li interrupted. He pointed far away. "Hee, you don't believe me? Then look over there." Emperor Yi sighed in his heart and looked over. If it was another demon he wouldn't be so obedient. But this ghost emperor was Emperor Li. Firstly, the Li kingdom was the biggest country in the world. Secondly, when the Yi kingdom had been destroyed by the Qin kingdom, he had defended the city of Wei for dozens of years. There was also the Li kingdom's contribution. The Yi kingdom had a princess Yangshuan who had married far away to the Li kingdom and had given birth to descendants. Thus, when the Yi kingdom was left with only one city, the Li kingdom supported it in secret and mediated with the Qin kingdom outside. The reason why there hadn't been a change of dynasties in the world was because the Xianmen didn't allow it. When the Qin kingdom took over, they all knew that it was because they had the approval of the Xianmen. Even the Li kingdom needed some courage to openly and covertly oppose the Qin kingdom's Zhonglu Xingue at such a time. Emperor Yi became a ghost emperor and was a ghost emperor that valued friendship. Because of these two reasons, when he followed Emperor Li, he didn't have the discord between normal demons. On the contrary, he was very harmonious. Now, he also looked in the direction Emperor Li was pointing at. After looking for a while, he didn't see anything. After looking for a while, he found something strange. At this moment, everyone's attention should be attracted by the two skeletons. Because of the heavy light and shadows in the sky and the flying dust on the ground, it was hard to notice anything else. However, the two ghost emperors were hiding here. Because of the angle, they could see the back of the cloud mountain. In the shadow of the cloud mountain, there seemed to be an extremely small dust-like figure bumping around like a headless fly. It seemed like it also wanted to sneak into the cloud mountain but couldn't do it. It was so anxious that it ran around randomly. Emperor Yi frowned. That is, Emperor Li snickered. Do you remember that I told you before that I was going to the cloud mountain to pick some souls to use? When I went there, I saw a huge battle. If I had to say, the people fighting had higher cultivation than me. Emperor Yi suddenly understood. The fire cloud from before. Yes. Emperor Li said as he touched the face of the beauty in his arms. His fingertips instantly felt smooth. I looked from afar. Those people were dressed like those stinky Taoists from the Taoists of the Taoists. But there seemed to be internal strife among these Taoist priests. One of them killed 4 or 5 of them, and the rest scattered like birds and beasts. Brother, you know that I fought with the Taoists from the Taoists of the Taoists before. Although they are Taoists, their aura is different. Especially the one who killed his companions. I think his aura is similar to the ghost Tao. I guess that the Taoists suffered a crushing defeat because of an internal conflict. But it doesn't matter. After the remaining Taoist swallowed his companions, he ran towards the cloud mountain like a madman. He was still shouting something like Li Yunshin, Su Yusong will tear you into pieces. Brother Su Yusong. Emperor Yi blinked his eyes in confusion. Then he exclaimed, Isn't that the name of the calligrapher? That's right. Emperor Li laughed. Otherwise, how can I guess that the current situation is caused by Li Yunshin? It seemed that even the sage of calligrapher had fallen into his trap. Now it seems that he has locked Yunshan up. That master of calligrapher wants to go in to seek revenge, but he can't. If I were that old guy, I'm afraid that I would die of anger before I am killed. Speaking of this, he couldn't help but laugh. When I just achieved Taoism, those reckless Taoists of the Taoists were instructed by the 2 old guys to kill me. At that time, I swore that one day I would kill my way to the cloud mountain and kill all those stinky Taoists, especially the 2 culprits. In the end, it was Li Yunshin who helped me vent my anger. Wow, I owe him a favor this time. This kid is really capable. Now the Taoists are destroyed. My ghost kingdom is getting stronger and stronger. I have a beauty in my arms. Life is just like that. I really regret that I didn't die earlier. He was talking excitedly and in high spirits. Then he stretched out his big hand, wanting to reach into Zither Monarch's chest and knead it. But when he touched her collar, he retracted his hand and shook his hand. He muttered to himself, No. Such a beauty. It's not fun to do it quietly. It would only be interesting if they were in perfect harmony with each other. I'd better cure her first. I can't. What if she runs away? It's better to think of a foolproof plan. Emperor Yi saw him like this and couldn't help but advise, Brother, let's find out the origin of this monster first. What? Emperor Li smiled. Brother Liu, you think too much. So what if we find out? It's easy for others. But such a beauty, even if she is the incarnation of Shinryu, I can't bear to let her go. Life is full of joy. Haven't I had enough of being afraid? Emperor Yi knew Emperor Li's pride. He didn't say anything more. What happened in the distance was important to many people. But to these 2 ghost emperors, it wasn't important. Thus, with a flicker of his body, he turned into a gust of black wind and returned to his temple. But at this moment, they heard the 2 skeletons in the distance let out terrifying screams. The screeches they made when they were advancing were more like a meaningless venting. But now it seemed like they were in extreme pain. Looking at them again at this time, one would find that they had become bony again. The closer they got to the cloud mountain, the faster their flesh and blood were eroded. The 2 skeletons weren't able to break the cloud mountain, but they were about to turn back into bare bones. They screamed and turned around as though they wanted to leave the cloud mountain. But at this moment, Emperor Li and Emperor Yi felt a slight shock in their hearts. Even the energy in their bodies trembled. They sensed an obvious, almost tangible malice. The skeletons locked onto them. Chapter 540. In fact, the two ghost kings were not the only ones targeted by the skeletons. Even the zither lady in his arms, Su Yusong, who was cursing crazily outside Cloud Mountain, the surviving cultivators who stayed at the edge of the battlefield, and everything else within the range of the skeleton's chi activity, who possessed cultivation and abilities beyond that of mortals, were all locked onto. If one had to find an explanation, perhaps it could be said that the power of the skeletons was constantly being eroded by the arrays in this world. They could no longer get magic power from the souls of the dead in the wilderness or from Yunshan, so they settled for the next best thing and targeted the high-level cultivators and demons. As for the others with low cultivation, they could be considered as side dishes that he had conveniently picked up. Almost everyone felt an inexplicable fear at the same time. This fear was deep and distant, like the pressure that low-level demons felt when they saw dragons. Even a ghost emperor like Emperor Li, who had become a ghost, felt this. It was extremely creepy. Once the fear arose, the skeletons immediately ran like crazy. Before, they were just walking slowly toward Yunshan, but now they showed amazing agility and speed. The two skeletons moved in unison. Their huge feet hit the ground heavily, as if 4 drumsticks were beating the war drum of the earth. The ground shook crazily. Even the trees at the edge of the mountain began to fall, and even the millstone-sized rocks jumped up from the ground like gravel. It only took the time of 2 breaths. The skeletons went from walking slowly to running, and then their huge bodies tore through the air, forming clouds of exploding mist around them, and then moving so fast that their silhouettes could barely be seen, only blurred shadows. It only took the time of 2 breaths. This sudden change made Emperor Li's expression change greatly. Then he suddenly shouted, "Motherf *Ker, this Li Yunshin kid is so vicious. Brother Liu, let's go." After saying this, he turned around and rushed into the distance. Emperor Yi was only a little slower than him. His expression also changed greatly and he chased after them. Both of them had an ominous thought. Now they could only pray that this thought was not true, that Li Yunshin was not as vicious as Emperor Li said. However, Emperor Li left much faster than Emperor Yi. In a breath's time, he disappeared into the horizon. After another 2 breaths, Emperor Yi finally caught up to him. The two of them had already flown 20 miles. Emperor Li stood up. Just as he was puzzled, he suddenly felt a gentle resistance in front of him. If it was an ordinary cultivator from the mystic sect, they would be extremely familiar with this resistance. It was a restriction of Taoist techniques. Just like the vast majority of restrictions in this world, one could continue forward after reaching this point. But no matter how much strength he exerted, as long as he did not find the right method, he would always be stuck in the same place, never able to walk out. He felt a chill in his heart. The two of them had chosen a random direction to escape in, and they had encountered such a restrictive spell. Even Emperor Li, who was in the profound realm, could do nothing about it. Then, there was no doubt that there were similar restrictions in the other directions. At this moment, Emperor Li cursed again, "What a vicious bastard." The flow of energy in the world suddenly reversed, causing the flow of energy in everyone's bodies to become chaotic. Then he sucked away the magic power of the 2 skeletons. Because the skeletons couldn't break through from Yunshan, they could only turn to kill the remaining demons and cultivators in the battlefield. At this time, he enclosed the vast battlefield. If this was really done by Li Yunshin and he did it through some means, then he was truly vicious. The Freemasonry's wandering souls and Dragon Sun just wanted to sacrifice the demon soldiers, demon generals and low-level cultivators, and then take what they needed. This kind of method was appalling to hear. It made people sigh that the beasts were indeed ruthless, cruel and ruthless. But now, Li Yunshin was even more vicious than them. Not only did he not let go of the low-level demon soldiers, demon generals and cultivators, but he also seemed to want to use the 2 skeletons to kill all the remaining demons and cultivators. When Emperor Li thought of this, even someone as fearless as him was scared to the point of breaking into a cold sweat. He also saw that the 2 skeletons had rushed to the northwest. Suddenly, dazzling light burst out on the flat ground like fireworks. He knew that was the direction where the thousands of surviving Taoist priests of the Shenmen sect had retreated. A large number of low-level cultivators could only adjust their breath where they were, and the high-level cultivators' magical powers and spells were greatly reduced. This group of people was the biggest target. The skeletons went straight to them and now they fought. But that fireworks-like light was fleeting. Very soon it returned to darkness. It was unknown whether the thousands of people had been completely obliterated by this attack, or if the high-grade cultivators had abandoned them and fled upon seeing that the situation was far from good. But no matter what, there were thousands of people. It happened so quietly, which made Emperor Li and Emperor Ye's faces turn green. At this moment, when Emperor Li muttered, "Li Yunxin, this vicious brat, Li Yunxin, this vicious brat," the air in front of them suddenly twisted. A blurry, flickering figure appeared in front of the two ghost emperors. "It's not a good habit to speak ill of people behind their backs, Brother Ji." Looking at the face and figure, who else could it be but Li Yunxin? Emperor Li and Emperor Yi were stunned. But soon Emperor Li frowned. "Li Yunxin, you brat. Do you want to lock us here and kill us?" Li Yunxin's figure smiled. "Alas, you can eat whatever you want, but you can't say whatever you want. If you say it like this, people will think that I, Li Yunxin, am vicious and vicious. You have to be responsible." Emperor Yi, who had been staring at him, heaved a sigh of relief. He said, "This is indeed Brother Li's tone." Emperor Li glared at him angrily. "Then you," Li Yunxin's figure waved his hand. "Don't rush. Listen to me. I'm using Yunshan's restriction to appear. I'm not familiar with it yet. Let's make it short. There is a layer of restriction outside Yunshan to prevent people from breaking in. If someone intrudes, spiritual energy will pour into that person's body and cause him to explode. Now, I have found a way to spread this restriction. So, with Cloud Mountain as the center, the area within a radius of 200 li is the range of this restriction. It's to prevent the skeletons of the two ancient demons from escaping. I didn't mean to trap you. As for what Brother Ji said about me, I don't know anything, haha. But I have a favor to ask of you too. 50 li to the south of Mount Cloudy Mountain. When you get there, you will see a small hill. There is a dense forest on the north side of the mountain. There is a cave on the west side of the forest. One of them is called Lu Gongzan, and the other is called Shanji. Brother Liu should know them. I'll have to trouble you two to go there and help me save the two of them first. I will set up another restriction there to ensure that you will not have to worry about your lives." Emperor Li and Emperor Yi looked at each other. Emperor Yi said, "Lu Gongzan and Shanji? I know. They were your demon generals in the city of Wei." Hearing that, Emperor Li was reassured. His anger immediately turned into joy. Good. I've long known that Brother Li Yunxin isn't a heartless person. Don't worry. Leave it to us. As long as we are safe, your two demon generals will be safe." Li Yunxin smiled. His figure was about to disappear but stopped. He seemed to notice the person in Emperor Li's arms. He looked at her in silence for about 2 breaths. Then he smiled again. "Oh, Brother Ji is in a good mood. You still want to take the beauty with you at this time." With Li Yunxin's promise, Emperor Li was in a good mood. Hearing him praise the beauty in his arms, he became proud again. He touched the face of the zither lady and said, "Hee. She is a little horse with a good cultivation. Brother Li, do you know who she is?" Li Yunxin suddenly said, "Oh? What did you say? Oh, I can't hear you. A horse is hard to tame. Brother Ji, you can't be careless. Oh, there is no signal." His figure turned into motes of light and quickly dissipated. The two ghost emperors looked at each other and hesitated for a while. But they felt that Li Yunxin had no reason to harm them. Thus, he transformed into a black gust of wind and whizzed in the direction he mentioned. The skeleton killed more than 1,000 low-level cultivators and headed straight for the south. There were 2 ghost emperors in the south. Since the ghost emperors left, the skeleton did not change its direction. Obviously, it was not coming for the 2 of them. It was someone else. Someone else who was also in the Guanyuan crypt not far from the south. Heavenspan Lord Yazi was originally in a deep sleep. Since he was sleeping, another consciousness in his body woke up. It was the soul of Dragon Jiao. When Li Yunxin saw him in the Golden Palace of Hatred 10 days ago, Dragon Jiao was already a little crazy, as if his mind was damaged. Even now he was still trapped in the room like that night. But there seemed to be nothing in the room for him to smash. It was just an empty room with a strong restriction that prevented him from going out. He could only wander around the room. At this time, the sudden change of qi movement also affected the Guanyuan crypt. The crypt was like the acupoints on the ground. The flow of qi movement in it was much more complicated than on the flat plane. At this time, the qi movement in the whole land changed, and the qi movement in the crypt changed even more violently. According to Li Yunxin's previous speculation, the Golden Palace of Hatred was actually one of the 8 treasures ancient scrolls of the painting saint. When he painted the 100 miles of rivers and mountains in the city of Wei, and when he saw the evil king's fog sending slaves to Decai Di Mao in the Pitfall Mountain, he knew that the scrolls created by high-level painting skills were inextricably linked with the Reiki of heaven and earth. They were the projection of the Reiki of heaven and earth, and at the same time, they existed independently in a strange state. Therefore, when the chi movement in the crypt changed, the golden palace of the scrolls was also greatly affected. Half of it immediately collapsed. However, this collapse did not seem like an ordinary palace, with broken bricks and tiles falling down. Instead, half of it stood majestically, and the other half became an ink-like shadow, as if there were only a few lines left, and between the lines was the void. There were many demon servants and demon soldiers in the hall. At this moment they had all turned into small ink figures, embedded in the shadows and not moving at all. Therefore the inhibition was opened. When Li Yunxin left the Guanyuan crypt, there were tens of thousands of demons hiding in the huge cave, and there were flames and noises everywhere. But by this time the cave had become pitch black, and it was as silent as a dark wasteland that had been uninhabited since ancient times. Because of the change in chi movement, the glorious golden palace also became dim after the collapse. Only the dotted lines were emitting a faint fluorescent light, which made them seem more unreal, as if they were projections embedded in the night sky. After a few breaths, a voice suddenly shouted, I'm out." Hatred, or the ninth young master, jumped out of the dim golden palace and landed on the ground. Perhaps it was because he had not tasted freedom for a long time, or because of the influence of the chi movement between heaven and earth, or because his mind was gradually eroded by hatred's will. He stumbled as he walked as if he was drunk. Hatred's body was originally injured by the skeleton, and he lost half of his head. At this time, his hair was disheveled, and his movement and expression made him look like a madman. There was no trace of the evil charm and handsome appearance when Li Yunxin first saw him. He walked aimlessly in the dark for a while and then murmured to himself, "Where is he? Where is he? Where is that little figure?" After saying that, he reached out and touched around as if he was trying to catch something. After a while he patted his head and froze on the spot. In the dark, he raised his eyebrows and gritted his teeth. I remember, he ran away. He took my body and ran away. He took my body. Damnly." He repeated the word, Li, many times, but he could not remember the last two words. After muttering for a while, he patted his head again. Why am I here? Someone said he was going to save me. Someone said he was going to save me. Who saved me? I have to thank you. He frowned and couldn't go on. He didn't know whether it was because of thinking or patting his head. At this time, a green and flickering figure suddenly lit up in the dark. In fact, it had been there for a while. It was behind him, listening to him quietly. But it didn't open its mouth until now, and its voice was full of surprise. "Ninth young master. I saved you." The ninth young master was startled. He jumped away like a frightened rabbit, turned his head to look at the figure and shouted, "How dare you? Who are you?" But when he saw it clearly, his eyes went blank again. He pointed at him. You are. Li. I am Li Yunxin, the ninth young master." The virtual figure of Li Yunxin said immediately, "Do you remember? Before this I promised you that I would save you. You were imprisoned by your second brother, and I promised you that I would save you." When Li Yunxin met the ninth young master, she already knew what Yizi had done. Now that he was here, due to the slow merging of their consciousnesses, he also had some impression of what Yizi had done. But Long Jio's consciousness was more chaotic than before. After he said so, Long Jio blinked his eyes for a long time and then said in a daze, "There is such a thing. You promised to save me. But I still remember that someone wanted to harm." "Yes, someone wanted to harm you." The virtual figure of Li Yunxin shouted, "Think about it, who wanted to harm you these days? It was your second brother who wanted to swallow you. Isn't that what you are most afraid of?" The ninth young master immediately widened his eyes and mouth. Yes. He wanted to swallow me. He imprisoned me." After saying this, he seemed to remember something. He clapped his hands and said happily, "I remember, I wanted you to save me and you really saved me. Good friend, tell me, what do you want me to reward you?" The virtual figure smiled. "You don't have to say these words. Now I just asked you to be a free body. But once the sun rises, your second brother hatred, the second brother who imprisoned you these days, who made you feel despair and pain, who wanted to swallow you alive, will lock you up again. You have to think of a way to imprison his body first. And then, I have prepared a body for you here. At that time, you will destroy this body and possess the body I have prepared for you. Then you will be free of worries, ninth young master." The ninth young master thought for a while, blinked and frowned. Li Yunxin smiled. In other words, listen to me first and imprison this body. Do you understand? The ninth young master nodded blankly. Then kill yourself so that your soul can leave your body. When your soul leaves your body, you can possess the body I have prepared for you. Do you understand? The ninth young master thought for a while and nodded. Then my second brothers, leave it to me, Li Yunxin said sincerely and seriously. This time I won't let him hurt you again. The ninth young master thought for a long time and said happily, good. Good. You are really a good man. Chapter 541. Hearing this, the light shadow's tone softened a lot, and it even sounded a little emotional. Anyway, you are the one who gave me what I have now. Consider it as me paying you back. The ninth young master didn't understand what he meant, but he frowned slightly as if he was thinking about something else. Li Yunxin's virtual image immediately said, Ninth young master, we don't have much time to think. Didn't you sense something terrible approaching? The terrible thing he was referring to was the two skeletons that were running towards them. The skeletons looked terrifying, but everyone could see that they didn't seem to have any intelligence at the moment. They were more like muddle-headed beasts. Maybe they used to be smart, but because they hadn't fully recovered, they could only rely on their instincts. Therefore, these things were hard to reason with, but they could be dealt with by taking advantage of the situation. For example, it was Li Yunxin who led them to come here. He was the one who made a strong spiritual power appear in the Guanyuan crypt. That spiritual power was like sweet dew to the two skeletons. So he didn't care about anything else, he only had eyes for this place. It was easy to say but difficult to do. But the ninth young master was the key link after he made a major discovery in the Little Cloud Mountain. It was necessary to take him down. What he said to the two ghost emperors was not false. The restriction outside the Cloud Mountain that prevented people from entering was actually not only for defensive purposes. It could also be turned into an offensive weapon by adjusting the internal chi of the Little Cloud Mountain. If he used this method earlier, the demons would die no matter how many came. But the wandering souls didn't really want to kill the demons. They wanted to kill the cultivators as well. Therefore, it gave Li Yunxin a chance to take advantage of it and put himself in such a situation. It could be said that he was harming himself in the end. Right now, his illusory image was using this formation to appear behind ninth young master and listen to his crazy ramblings. Therefore he knew. Compared to the last time he saw Long Jiu in Hatred's body, he seemed to be even crazier now. Ninth young master was originally a brutal demon that did not understand the ways of the world. But from a demon's point of view, most of what he did in the past was based on instinct, nothing out of the ordinary. Although he was terrifying in the eyes of humans, compared to other fiendish demons, compared to his eldest brother and second brother, or even compared to the wandering souls of the Freemasons, or compared to some cultivators of the Orthodoxy sword sect, he could almost bear the label of naive and unaffected. If he wasn't born in a demon's home but in the human world, perhaps he would still be a gentle young master. Now that the ninth young master's mind was worn out and his memory was in a mess, he could be called naive. Of course, Li Yunxin did not have the ability to make him completely forget the past, but he had other means. The ninth young master was imprisoned in Hatred's body. Using the words he said to Li Yunxin that night, it was an unimaginably horrible experience. Now that he escaped from the cell due to the disorder of the chi of heaven and earth, the first thing he felt was joy and relief. But because of this joy, the second thing was a greater horror. What was the most terrible torture to a person? It was to give him hope and then cut off his hope. The ninth young master, who was imprisoned in Hatred's body, thought that he would eventually be resurrected, now experienced a short period of freedom. Of course, he was most afraid of dawn, afraid that he would be imprisoned in the end. He didn't need any means to deal with this terrible fear, just a few words could make him subconsciously ignore a lot of things. And now, after listening to Li Yunxin's words, he did feel the terrible atmosphere. He used to be in the transcendent state, but now the body of hatred was in the mysterious state. Although he was seriously injured and although he couldn't control his body as he wished, his senses were still sharp. Once he sensed the terrible atmosphere, the joy on his face disappeared. He opened his eyes wide. It was no wonder that he was shocked. Although his cultivation was weak in the past, he was still a dragon's. How could other demons give him such an experience? An irresistible sense of oppression. Your second brother, Hatred, should have an impression in his head. This thing was released by him and your brother to destroy Shenmen. The Shadow's words were getting more and more worried and nervous. But do you know the situation now? Now that they have all failed and you escape from the cell with your second brother's body, these two things are naturally back to catch you. If you don't leave now, it will be too late. The ninth young master turned pale with fright and anxiously spun on the spot. Catch me? Catch me? What should I do? I can't go back. I can't go back even if I die. I'm going to fight them now. Li Yunxin hurriedly said, ninth young master, have you forgotten what I told you? You must leave now. With your fastest speed, go to the northeast. When you reach the battlefield in the northeast, I will designate a place for you. He recounted everything in detail. At this time, what he said was like a life-saving straw for the ninth young master, who was about to be overwhelmed by the double fear. He didn't have time to think about it. As soon as he finished his words, the body of hatred and the soul of Dragon 9 immediately turned into a gust of demonic wind and went straight to the battlefield in the northeast that Li Yunxin mentioned. He used the body of hatred to escape with all his might. Of course, his speed was impressive. As soon as he got out of the cave, he saw the two huge figures rushing towards him. He didn't suspect anything. It only took him a dozen breaths' time to escape more than 10 miles away. He arrived at the battlefield that Li Yunxin mentioned. Looking up, it was empty and desolate. The battlefield was full of corpses and broken armors. It was the place where Li Yunxin faked his death a few days ago. At this moment, the shadow of Li Yunxin appeared beside him again, guiding him to the depth of the pile of corpses. He went straight to a place where the corpses were piled up like a mountain and asked him to dig down. The ninth young master used his demonic power and turned over all the corpses in just 3 or 4 moves. He could only see a lot of fragmented corpses under the dim light from the top of the sky. The shadow of Li Yunxin pointed at a fragment. It looked like the edge of a big knife. He said solemnly, "This is it. My temporary residence is right here. Take it and hide it." After saying this, he didn't say anything else. Although the shadow was not stable and the face was a little blurry, it could still be seen that his eyes were bright like 2 sharp knives. But his eyes were bright like 2 sharp knives. He was staring at the ninth young master, who seemed to be scared out of his wits and had nowhere to go. The ninth young master immediately took the thing in his hand, but he didn't know what it was. He poured his demonic power into it as usual, but it was like a clay ox entering the sea. There was no reaction at all. He became impatient and started to mutter to himself, What? What happened? How did I hide it? How did I hide it? How did I hide it? Teach me." Then he became angry and impatient again. The shadow of Li Yunxin looked at him for a few breaths' time and suddenly said, I was wrong. Ninth young master, walk a dozen steps to the north and dig again." That ninth young master didn't even say a word. He flew over again and used his demonic power to dig up the corpse and the soil that was soaked black. This time he finally saw something different. A folding fan was stuck in the ground. It was clean and glowed faintly in the sky. "You hide here first," the shadow said seriously. "Hide in the fan. There is a magic array I set in it. It can hold hundreds of thousands of dead souls. It's not a problem to store your body." The ninth young master said, "And then? What about me? How long do I have to hide? You said you would save me." "You are, Lily." He was interrupted immediately. "Of course I will save you. You touch the handle of the fan first. See if you can touch anything." Hearing this, the ninth young master reached out his hand subconsciously, and then he was slightly stunned. Li Yunxin's temporary imperial residence was opened. His hand reached in without any hindrance and touched an iron chain. The iron chain was like a venomous snake. As soon as it touched his fingertips, it slithered up his arms and rushed out, tightly wrapping around his body. It was the soul-hooking iron chain that Bai Yanjun left for him. It could be long or short and had endless transformations. Now, in just an instant, it had wrapped around the Yazi's upper body and legs like armor, leaving only its arms outside. The ninth young master fell to the ground immediately and shouted, "What is this? What do you want to do?" "Of course I want to save you," Li Yunxin said seriously. "The dragon's soul is not extinguished. If you die here now, your soul and your second brother's soul won't be free. They'll run to a new cell. Do you want to live like that?" The ninth young master blinked his eyes. "Of course I don't. I don't want to." "Then we have to find a new body for your soul," Li Yunxin said in a low voice. "I can draw a new body for you. It's your old appearance. When you die, your soul will run to your new body and be free. Your second brother's soul will be locked on the fan to prevent him from harming you again. Now that I've restrained you, It's also because I'm afraid that he'll suddenly go on a rampage and ruin our plan. Do you believe me now? The ninth young master blinked his eyes and frowned. He seemed to remember something, but it was not clear. So he didn't care about it for a while. But in the end, the fear of losing his freedom and himself prevailed. He said hesitantly, I believe you. Then use the method of transforming the soul into the real body and create an incarnation. Li Yunxin said firmly, to create a new body for you, I still have something to study. I need the Jade Slip of Clarity. The Jade Slip of Clarity is 50 miles to the east. Take the Jade Slip and other treasures and ask your incarnation to go to Cloud Mountain. I'll get it. If I get it, I can finish everything before dawn and give you back your freedom. Now go quickly. If your second brother wakes up by force, you won't have a chance at all. His tone was urgent and strict, urging repeatedly. The ninth young master's mind was muddled, so he could only listen to him. He could use the body of hatred to do something. He immediately created a real body and went straight to the 50 miles away mentioned by Li Yunxin. It was actually the place where Su Yusong, Zhuomuxia, and the others fought with Red Lady. After the death of Li Yunxin, the two sides were in a stalemate, advancing and retreating, and the main direction of attack changed several times. Now the incarnation followed the hint given by Li Yunxin, found the place where the lava was overflowing, and soon found the Jade Slip of Clarity. This thing was kept in Su Yusong's leather bag before. Later he met Red Lady, and in order to save Zhuomuxia, he threw the treasure out. But in the end he couldn't save Zhuomuxia. Not only did Zhuomuxia die, but his obsession was also half broken. He became a monster that only wanted to tear Li Yunxin into pieces. How could he still have the mood to collect the treasure? Therefore, the Jade Slip of Clarity, as well as many other people and things, were now lying quietly on the black rock that had solidified but was still shockingly hot. It was this thing that caused a series of disturbances and led Li Yunxin to the situation he was in today. However, at this moment, when all the powerful people in the world gathered and died like meteors, this thing that had been snatched by everyone was now lying on the ground like an abandoned thing. When Yazi, or rather, the incarnation of Ninth Young Master, landed here, he saw the translucent jade slip at first glance. Among all the magic treasures and puppets, this was the only one that was transparent and particularly eye-catching. The virtual image of Li Yunxin appeared next to him again and said in a low voice, "Take this thing and the rest of the things on the ground, and go to the direction of Yunshan. I'm now controlling the tactical formation on the mountain, so I can't go too far away from Yunshan. You have to go to the foot of the mountain to give it to me." However, although he said this, the ninth young master didn't move. He stared at the jade slip for a while with a frown, and then slowly walked over and bent down to pick it up. He held it in his palm and touched it gently. Li Yunxin shouted again, "Hurry up! We don't have much time." When his image said this, the ninth young master turned sideways to him, lowered his head and frowned as if he was thinking about something. However, when he shouted again, the ninth young master suddenly raised his head. The fear and hesitation on his face disappeared and became cold. In fact, it was more like he had frozen some other strong emotions into a block of ice and covered his face. Translucent jade scroll. Translucent jade scroll. I remember this thing. He stared at it and murmured, "I used my reverse scale to exchange for it. Of course I remember." Then he suddenly opened his mouth and roared with grief and indignation, "Li Yunxin! You are Li Yunxin! Ah!" He grinned and laughed, but his laughter sounded like a cry of sorrow. "Do you still want to hurt me? Do you still want to hurt me today?" Beside him, the virtual image of Li Yunxin flickered for a while, but he was also silent for a while. Then he laughed. His tone was not as serious and urgent as before. "Okay. I thought many things would make you remember yourself, but I didn't expect that it was this thing that made you come back to your senses." The ninth young master stared at him and sneered, "Yes. Now you are the ninth dragon's son and you are proud of yourself. It's not surprising that you have forgotten the past." Chapter 542. But the image shook his head. "But this time I didn't want to hurt you. Ninth young master, I did want to save you. If you didn't believe this, why did you beg me in the golden palace of hatred?" "Believe? What do you believe?" The ninth young master stared at him with his eyes wide open. "Believe that you, a kind and honest man, tricked me into tying my real body 50 miles away, was to save me?" The virtual image of Li Yunxin stood up straight and sighed, "To save you." Hearing this, the ninth young master immediately laughed grimly, Good, Li Yunxin. I used to say that you were interesting. Seems that you are still interesting. Tell me, how did you save me? Instead, you tied me up? When he ran out of Guan Yuan's crypt, half of his head was missing. His hair was disheveled and he looked frightened. He looked miserable and ugly. But at this moment, a ferocious look appeared on his face. Because he remembered the past and the old grudges, he didn't seem to care about his own life and death. He stood up proudly and his temperament was different. Although his hair was also disheveled, there was an additional sense of sadness and heroism. Because if I didn't do this, you wouldn't have believed me, Li Yunxin said calmly. I told you the truth in the crypt. But I was afraid that you would end up like this, so I tied you up first. At this time, you have to believe me even if you don't believe me. If not, with your temper, I guess you would have turned around and left. I stumbled around for a while and then I found that I had nowhere to go. At that time, even if you wanted to live, even I couldn't do anything. The ninth young master squinted at him. I don't believe you and I don't listen to you. So what? I've died once. So what if I die again? After saying this, he squeezed the jade script of illumination in his hand and suddenly laughed crazily. Ah, good. This thing is called the jade script of illumination. Ah. Today I'll break it and make your wish come true. I'll let you have a taste. Don't use my mistakes to punish yourself, ninth young master. Just as he was laughing like this, looking as if his mind was about to become muddled again, Li Yunxin suddenly interrupted him. His blurry face was filled with sincerity and solemnity. Suddenly he spoke without any rhyme or reason. The indignant demon was taken aback by his words and he stopped. What did you say? Don't use my mistake to punish yourself. Li Yunxin's image looked into his eyes. You know in your heart that you really want to trust me again. What I did was to live, just like you do today. But I didn't have a choice in the past. Now I want to be a good person. The pupils of the ninth young master shrank into a thin line in anger. You're talking nonsense again. Are you trying to be mysterious again? This young master won't listen. He didn't listen to her, and he didn't seem to have any intention of leaving. He saw Li Yunxin looking at him sincerely. I know what you're thinking. No one in the world understands you better than me. Although we haven't known each other for long, I also know that you're a rare demon with a true temperament. If you didn't want to trust me, why would you ask me for help in the Golden Palace? You're like this now because you haven't realized what you're thinking. Let me tell you, ninth young master. In fact, now you're more willing to believe that I really want to save you, and that I didn't lie to you. But when you think this way, it reminds you of the times when I lied to you. So you've been holding a grudge in your heart and you've been wanting to vent your anger. But now you're seriously injured and I've restrained you. I'm on Mount Yunshan so you can't hurt me. Since that's the case, you have to find a way to hurt me. Since you can't project your resentment outwards, you project it on yourself. You're thinking that I want to save you and I'm worried about you. Since that's the case, you'd rather give up your life than let me do what I want. You want me to regret lying to you and losing your trust. Even if it's just a little bit of regret, it's good enough, isn't it? The ninth young master opened his eyes wide. What nonsense are you talking about? But Li Yunxin wasn't interrupted by him. He continued to say, you're just like those children in the secular world. Last, you're beaten by your parents. You hang yourself, jump into the water and jump off a building. In fact, it's all because of the anger and resentment in your heart. What can you do to your parents? So you project your anger on yourself and it becomes self-harming and self-deprecating, ninth young master. Li Yunxin paused and continued, when we were in the city of Wei, you also possessed this body and said goodbye to me generously. You told me not to disgrace the name of the ninth dragon. At that time you were still sane. I thought we could forget about it. But then I saw you being imprisoned in the Golden Palace. Even if I have a heart of stone, I couldn't bear it. Now, everyone in the world knows that the ninth dragon is a peerless demon. I think I didn't disgrace your name. Because of that, I don't want to have any regrets in my heart. You gave me this demon body. I also want to give you a body to make up for what I owe you. So, the ninth young master, don't punish yourself because of the mistakes I made to you in the past. At least you should live a happier life than our second brother. After saying these words, he became silent and only looked at the demon in front of him. And the demon was also silent. Its lips moved but it couldn't say a word for a long time. At this time, a series of bright flashes suddenly burst from the direction of Guan Yuan's crypt. The ninth young master fled from the crypt in a panic, but the skeletons didn't change their direction. Looking at the current situation, it seemed that they were fighting with a powerful figure. But these two skeletons could prevent spells and supernatural powers. Presumably the so-called powerful figure would also have a headache. The flashes and the roar broke the short silence between the two. The ninth young master groaned angrily. After 2 breaths he said, "What you said is beautiful. But didn't you also want me to give you the Jade Scroll of Enlightenment?" Li Yunxin nodded immediately. Yes, yes, yes. I did it for the Jade Scroll." The ninth young master snorted again. "Then we are just taking what we need. There is no friendship between us. Let me tell you, you should know that the dragon's soul is immortal. If you do something this time. Now the 9 sons of the dragon are all here. Even if I have to risk losing my consciousness, I will definitely take revenge." Li Yunxin sighed softly. "Of course. As long as you are happy." The ninth young master was silent for a while. Then he suddenly sighed and said in a very bleak tone, "Forget it. You are proud of yourself now. You even dare to plot against my first and second brother? What can I threaten you with? I can only blame myself." Sighed Li Yunxin. Now he was suddenly generous, suddenly resentful, and suddenly depressed. He really did look like a soul that had slightly lost its mind. At this moment, he was sighing as if he had resigned to his fate. "What does the body you prepared for me look like?" Li Yunxin smiled. "It is how the ninth young master used to look like. When I was in the place of the outer fringe, I once drew a body for my demon general. It seemed to be very useful. Now that my realm is higher, maybe I can draw a body for the ninth young master in the state of truth." The ninth young master was stunned. He widened his eyes. "The state of truth? What realm are you in now?" Li Yunxin was silent for a while. He said calmly, "The peak of the state of truth. Maybe I can enter the mystic realm." After listening to his words, the ninth young master opened his mouth. He did not say anything for a long time. In the end he sighed again. All right. The first time I saw you it was a thunderstorm night in spring. So, it is only mid-autumn now. But you are about to enter the mystic realm." Li Yunxin did not say anything. The ninth young master sighed with a mixture of sadness and joy. He said, "Higher. Higher than you." Li Yunxin was slightly stunned. He finally understood what he was talking about. He smiled. "All right. Your eyes must be sharp." Li Yunxin smiled again. He glanced at the jade script of illumination in his hand. "The ninth young master's appearance is the most beautiful I have ever seen. It is better not to change it too much." The ninth young master snorted softly. "You are speaking the truth. Then forget it." "This jade script of illumination, how do I give it to you?" Li Yunxin's expression became serious. "I am in Mount Yun now. I can't split myself out. I only need this jade script. You go to Mount Yun from here. When you reach the foot of the mountain, put this thing on the ground. I will try this formation. Let me see if I can control the nearby aura to cast a magical power to draw it in." The ninth young master frowned. "Control the aura to cast a magical power? I will try," Li Yunxin said. "When your body is ready, I will tell you what to do." The ninth young master sighed slightly. "All right." After saying this he rolled up and rushed to Mount Yun. Li Yunxin's virtual shadow talked to the ninth young master at ease. But he himself was not at ease at all. It should be said that since he escaped from the county jail of Qinghe County, he was at his wits' end. He had discovered that the wall of the secret chamber where the cocoon was placed in the floating mountain was actually engraved with the spiritual chi map of this world. If it was damaged, the small Mount Yun outside the floating mountain would faithfully reflect the damage. It was as if the entire small Mount Yun was a projection of that secret chamber. Then he discovered that the density of the spiritual chi in the land of the small Mount Yun was also different, which coincided with the spiritual chi map on the wall of the secret chamber. This seemed to mean that the entire real world was like a projection of this small Mount Yun. He did not know what the people who built this secret chamber in Mount Yun were thinking, and what was the mystery behind this arrangement. The real world, the small Mount Yun, and the secret chamber were like 3 layers of matrices. Each layer could exert influence on the wider world outside. If this thing was really built by the Celestials, they probably only needed to be in this small Mount Yun and change the topography of this place, and they would be able to influence the wider world outside. This was very much like a method of painting that had been cultivated to a very high level, absorbing the spiritual chi between heaven and earth into the painting. Once the painting was completed and the brush was drawn on the scroll, it would cause a great change in heaven and earth. The difference was that this small Mount Yun now affected the whole world. This was indeed not something that could be done by human power. But no matter what, it was impossible for him to figure out these secrets alone in such a short period of time. What he knew at the moment was something else. Perhaps someone was also afraid of the power of this thing, and thus changed the topography of this small Mount Yun. With rivers, undulating hills and dense forests, it was covered up. If Li Yunxin had not been brought into the secret chamber where the cocoon was placed by Gong Di and seen the spiritual qi map on the wall, he would not have noticed the strangeness of this small Mount Yun. Thus, what he did was to control the topography and layout of this small Mount Yun to change the qi movement on the vast land outside the Mount Yun. The entire small Mount Yun was hundreds of miles long and wide, and was comparable to a small prefecture in this world. If he still had his divine sense, it would not be difficult for him to move mountains and fill rivers in this hundreds of miles long and wide. Now that he was at the peak of the true state, it would only be slightly difficult for him to move tens of thousands of tons of soil into the sky. However, most of the divine sense was restricted in this small Mount Yun. Even if he could summon the little figures that Qining had left on the stone wall to help him, it would still be like manual labor in the secular world, only much stronger. The only thing to be thankful for was that he did not memorize the spiritual qi map on the wall of the secret chamber. He only glanced at it unintentionally. Then he hypnotized himself to go back in time, but the impression he left after he woke up was limited. It was limited to the memory of the vicinity of the Guanyuan crypt in the Mount Yun. But in fact, it was enough. For example, he was standing on a pile of soil. When he first entered the small Mount Yun, the wandering soul disguised as Su Yusong led him through the dense forest at the foot of the floating mountain until they reached a natural treehouse in the forest. Then he stayed in the treehouse for several days. Now he was standing in the place where the treehouse used to be. However, the big tree had long been cut down by hundreds of little figures made of lines, and the ground was dug several feet deep, revealing its original appearance. The ground was made of an unknown hard metal. The shapes of mountains and rivers were etched on it. Among the etches, there was a mercury-like liquid flowing black and white, which seemed to symbolize the yin and yang in the world. The small Mount Yun, which was hundreds of miles in length and width, was a miniature version of the entire Midland. And this black and white flowing gold simulated the real flow of the natural powers in the real world. It was not hard to imagine how dense and fine the lines of mountains and rivers were etched on it. As he had expected, mountains and rivers affected each other, plants affected each other, and villages and towns affected each other. It was an extremely complex and integrated system. Now, although he had an impression of the spiritual qi map in the secret chamber, if he really wanted to correspond to these dense lines and those black and white flowing gold, the difficulty could not be described with the phrase, as difficult as climbing up to the sky. He stood high on the mound, his body stained with sand, and even a few fallen leaves on his hair bun. But he didn't notice these at all. He just frowned and stared at the metal ground under the mound, which had been excavated by those little figures. In terms of size, this piece of ground was only 2 steps horizontally and 2 steps vertically. But in such a small space, it contained half of the Manwan Mountain, half of the Yezhong Plain, and the entire sky-reaching swamp. Before, the Zither Master had refined all the dead souls on this battlefield according to the magic formation left by Wanderer White. The flow of the natural powers in the real world was clearly shown on this metal ground. When the natural powers changed, the black and white flowing gold changed as well. He was standing on this mound like a god looking down at the earth, and clearly saw the magic formation controlled by the Zither Master. Then, when the refined spirit creature power gathered into the Zither Master's body, he moved the 2-colored flowing gold on the ground. Then, as if a god had moved the mountains and the earth in the real world, the natural powers of the whole battlefield were changed in an instant. The spirit creature power that should have flowed into the Zither Master's body was suddenly changed and gathered in the Cloud Mountain. The great demon and young dragon master, who were at the peak of the profound realm, were immediately seriously injured. Emperor Li's palm hit them and they lost consciousness. And the aurora in the sky that the Zither Master had seen before, was the strange phenomenon that was caused in the real world by Li Yunxin when he reversed the natural powers in the Cloud Mountain. After that, he led the 2 skeletons to the Guanyuan cave in the Manwan Mountain, and also used the same method to directly change the natural powers outside the Cloud Mountain. Logically speaking, since he knew such a heaven-defying method, he should be invincible in the world, and have the power to steal the sky and change the sun with just a wave of his hand. Perhaps even the gods would not be able to do so. If he kept hiding in the little Cloud Mountain, dug up the entire ground and spent a year and a half to study it carefully, changing the chi activity of every corner of the world into the one he liked and designed, by then all the chi of the world would be under his control. What difference would there be between him and a god? But unfortunately, there had never been such an easy thing in the world. After Li Yunxin destroyed the Zither Master's formation, seriously injured him with spirit creature power, and led the two skeletons to the Guanyuan cave, he realized that this thing was not supposed to be used in this way. It was not like what he was doing, using external force to forcibly reverse the black and two-colored liquid gold to achieve his goal. His method was extremely simple and crude, directly blocking the path of the liquid gold between the carvings with his fingers, or scooping it up and filling it somewhere else. By doing so, the natural powers of the world outside the cloud mountain were indeed temporarily changed. But in less than a dozen breaths, the liquid gold would return to its original position, and he would have to hurriedly adjust it again. Therefore he knew that there must be some secret method, some correct method that could permanently change the flow of the liquid gold, and make the natural powers of the world produce a permanent change. As soon as this thought came to his mind, he also remembered another thing. The jade slip of enlightenment. When he was young, he listened to Li Chunfeng and Shang Guanyu preach to him. At that time, the two did not teach him any profound Taoist techniques, but they made his foundation extremely solid. They were probably thinking about how long it would take, and whether they wanted him to step into the world of cultivation or not. But later the two died and he no longer had any teachers. Just like a student, in elementary school his foundation was extremely solid. But once he graduated he dropped out of school, and when he went to a more advanced field he had to learn everything by himself. Therefore at first, it was very fast for him to learn some basic techniques from the jade slip of enlightenment left by Qin Zhao. However, as his realm gradually increased and he reached a high level of cultivation, the drawback of his lack of systematic training was revealed. When he looked at the contents of the jade slip, there were many things that he did not understand. When Qin Zhao casually said that it was easy to obtain, he would frown and ponder for a long time, but he could not understand it. It was not that he was stupid, but he had no clue at all. But even so, he often took out the jade slip and looked at it lazily when he was free. It seemed that after looking at it, he had an impression of some of the things in it. In the few words that Qin Zhao recorded in the jade slip, there would occasionally be words like, black and white pure gold qi, and so close heaven and earth revolves. These words, Li Yunxing could tell at a glance, did not sound like her. And she must have heard it from somewhere, and she did not seem to know much about it, so she casually recorded it. The reason why he still had an impression of it was that Qin Zhao rarely used this kind of tone that only belonged to this world, this era, to record things in such a genteel manner. Until now he saw this black and white metal that flowed like water. And then he saw this iron plate that etched the layout of the entire world's spiritual power. Wasn't this the black and white pure gold qi, and so close heaven and earth revolves, that Qin Zhao occasionally mentioned in the jade slip of enlightenment? Qin Zhao must have heard of this thing before, but he did not know if she knew that it was in Shaoyin Mountain. And did Su Yusong and Zhuo Muzhou want the jade slip of enlightenment for this? Did the two of them know about this huge secret in Shaoyin Mountain? Did the saints of the past know? If they did not know, then Grandmaster D of the Freemasonry? Judging by his appearance, he should have entered and exited the secret room in the floating mountain where the cocoon was placed several times. Did they know? And where were they hiding? Did the elders know about what he was doing now? He had many questions in his heart, as well as a lot of worries and uneasiness. If it was someone else, he had just met the Freemasonry elders on the floating mountain and was almost killed. By now he would probably be scared shitless and leave this place. But he was so bold. Not only did he not leave, but he also started a large-scale construction on Shaoyin Mountain, as if he wanted to show that group of people. But until now no one else had appeared on Shaoyin Mountain. This seemed to mean that the Freemasonry elders were not hiding on Shaoyin Mountain? But he could not figure this out at the moment. There were too many secrets on Shaoyin Mountain. Even its true master seemed to be unable to see the whole picture. All he could do was retrieve the jade slip of enlightenment as soon as possible. If he could find some trick in the jade slip, perhaps he would have a greater harvest today. If not, after he took care of the matters here, it was time for him to escape to the east. But it would be escape. It would not be like before where it would be escape. After these many thoughts went through his mind, Li Yunxing jumped off the pile of dirt. Previously he had used the black and white flowing gold here to set up a formation, called the restriction outside Shaoyin Mountain to cover the entire battlefield, and made his image appear 100 miles away. Now he was going to do something else. It was not a small trick like controlling qi to cast spells and storing the jade slip of enlightenment on Shaoyin Mountain. Instead he was going to use the sweet fruits that Dragon Sun and the Wandering Souls had worked so hard to obtain, for himself. Chapter 543. So he landed on the ground and walked to the front of the formation in 2 steps. He was stepping on the metal plate with flowing gold rotating under his feet. This made even a person like him feel a strange sense of pleasure in his heart. The patterns carved on the board and the golden chi flowing in the patterns represented the whole world. Although he didn't use spiritual power and just stepped on it normally wouldn't cause any interference to these things. But this wasn't some random topographic map that was placed in the study of those secular emperors to look at and fantasize about. This was something that could really affect the whole world, and now it seemed that the whole world was under his feet. Fortunately, although people said that he was a demon and some said that he was cruel and crazy, he wasn't a lunatic like the wandering souls. What kind of people were the scariest when they went crazy? In short, it wouldn't be someone like him. People like him had a lot of tricks up their sleeves and thought a lot. When they really went crazy, they couldn't compare to existences like those wandering souls and ghost cultivators. Their obsession was the root of their existence in the world. For the sake of a paranoid idea, letting the whole world die with them might be as natural as eating and drinking. If those guys knew this secret and saw this thing, even if they could only use spiritual aura to temporarily change the aura in some places, it was hard to imagine what those guys would do. For example, Su Yusong, who was jumping up and down outside the cloud mountain after he had diverted the chi of the earth, looked like he was ready to die with his son. However, Li Yunxin wasn't cruel. She wouldn't give him this chance. It was also because of this that he changed his previous plan. He wanted to kill Su Yusong with his own hands. In the end, Red Lady did it for him. However, according to his personality, he should have been happy to beat a drowning dog. He should have stood in front of Su Yusong and told him his plan one by one. Then he should have returned everything that the wandering soul had said to him in the past, so that he could vent his anger. What he hated the most was to wear luxurious clothes in the night. If it was the kind of person who killed his sworn enemy without him knowing who it was, that was enough to drive people crazy. After doing something beautiful, he must listen to others' praise, look at others' surprise, and see others' dumbfounded expressions of, "I never thought of that." Therefore he was a little disheartened at this time. Actually, what he needed to do next was to take over the soul-refining formation that Wanderer Bai had left behind in the Guanyuan cave. Since the Zither Lady had activated the formation, she could naturally destroy it as well. Because of this, he waited patiently and heavily injured Zither Monarch at the critical moment. Now that he saw his big brother in the hands of Emperor Li, he was really happy. But he still remembered when his big brother and second brother's image came to Little Cloud Mountain. The two of them saw that he was in dire straits and was about to die, but they stood there chatting and joking with Su Yusong and Zhuomuxia. Even if one of them played the good cop and the bad cop, so what? In the end, they all wanted to obtain his secrets before he died. They were not even willing to be hypocrites anymore. Up until now. His big brother and second brother had fared better. Zither Monarch was originally injured. Coupled with the attack that Li Yunxin had given him by mobilizing the chi of heaven and earth, his injuries could be said to be beyond repair. It would be difficult for him to recover in a short period of time. In fact, this was one of the reasons why high-level cultivators and demons did not easily make a move in the past. One must know that this was not some game from Li Yunxin's previous world. If you were injured, take some medicine and you will immediately recover. Here, it was like the people in the secular world. It was easy to say that it would take 100 days to recover from an injury. In this world, if an ordinary person really injured their muscles and bones, they would probably become disabled. But demons and cultivators, especially those who had reached the realm of Zither Lady and hatred, had the power to move mountains and fill the seas. If they were not careful, they would be seriously injured and their realm would be damaged. They would need a lot of demon power and spiritual power to make up for it. But there was no such thing as cultivating for hundreds of years to reach this realm, or recovering from a serious injury in a few days. It was like picking a fruit from a tree and having to grow another year to get it back. The reason why Zither Lady and hatred dared to do these things was probably because Zither Lady was confident. She believed that with his strength at the peak of the profound realm and as a demon of the dragons, it would be difficult for anyone to really hurt him. As for hatred, he had long planned to refine the souls of the dead. He was not afraid of being injured. As long as he did not die, the demon power refined from the souls of hundreds of thousands of cultivators and demons could be quickly replenished. The two's wishful thinking was very good. And indeed they were not injured by other cultivators, but by two skeletons. That evil king could be said to have harmed these two, but it was not known whether it was intentional or not. Now Zither Lady was in the hands of Emperor Li and hatred was bound by his iron chain. That iron chain was not an ordinary object. Once bound, there was no way to break free. Because it did not bind the body but the soul, it trapped the soul that was still in the body, so how could the body move? But with hatred's cultivation, it was more difficult than ascending to heaven to tie him up when he was alive and kicking. But tonight, with the help of the ninth young master, it did not take much effort at all. Now, the four people who had seen his miserable appearance in the study and talked cheerfully and wittily all ended up in a miserable state. Half of it was his plan and the other half was a coincidence. And the jade slip of enlightenment was now sent to him by the ninth young master. The so-called protagonist's fate and 10 lives worth of merit were probably just like this. But Li Yunxin still did not have much energy. It was like, in his previous world, when someone saw a beautiful scene, their camera ran out of battery. He stopped, stooped down and took a careful look at the ground. From this thing he could not see outside images. Everything he saw was deduced from the black and white flowing gold. For example, if the earth chi in a certain place suddenly moved, it was not the majestic aura of natural circulation, but a lot of small streams that were intertwined and disturbed in a regular pattern. Then, it was obvious that someone with high cultivation was fighting there. Therefore he was able to slightly adjust the chi in that place. After extremely complicated calculations and considerations, he considered both the flow of chi on the ground itself and the influence brought about by people in that place. Then he asked himself to show his doppelganger there and adjust the chi. Otherwise, if he were to randomly appear in this vast area of 1,000 miles, he might not even bump into a single living person in a day. But with this glance he saw something else. It seemed that someone was fighting with the two skeletons. He knew that there were many demons hiding in the Manwan mountain. Moreover, those that were able to survive the rain of fire that even he felt lingering fear in his heart weren't nobodies, and most of them were greater demon kings from all over the world. These people were targeted by the skeletons, so they had to fight back. The black and white molten gold were divided into countless tiny whirlpools, and each whirlpool represented a human or a demon. There were hundreds of them and they were fighting against the two skeletons. These should be most of the surviving spirit creature kings in this place. Or in other words, most of the surviving spirit creature kings in the Midland. Li Yunxin didn't care about these spirit creature kings, who were not friends with him. But the one who caught his attention was another one who was especially powerful as a peak-level profound realm being. Earlier, when those spirit creatures were fighting outside, he stayed in here and watched. Therefore he knew that although the dragons were powerful, only 2 of them were the most powerful. One was Long Daqin Master and the other was his third sister, the evil spirit. That day at the front lines the evil lord said some heartwarming words to him. But how could a man like him be fooled by a few words? Everyone could say beautiful words and he himself was a master of it. Words didn't mean anything and he had to see how things would turn out. Therefore he saw what his third sister, the evil spirit, was doing. She seemed to be protecting someone. Li Yunxin was also familiar with that sense of power. Bai Yunxin, the adopted daughter of the Golden Rock King, had returned to the profound realm because of the feather cloak. Somehow the evil spirit took a liking to her. It was easy to see that she was protecting her in every way. The 2 skeletons had sealed most of the spirit creature's powers. Therefore they fought like mortals in the mortal world and had to rely on their fists and weapons. But those skeletons were like strong men, and those spirit creature kings were like ants on the ground. These ants were stronger than real ants. At least their bodies were strong, they were agile, and they were relatively intelligent. Their bodies were not proportionate to the skeletons, but as the saying goes, ants can bite an elephant to death. They could still fight for a while. But it was only a while. The surrounding area was sealed by the formation outside Yunshan by Li Yunxin. It was very easy for him to hide in the turtle shell of Yunshan and watch a group of trapped beasts being swallowed by the skeletons one by one. It was a pity that Bai Yunxin had a bad life. Red Lady escaped far away after she left Yunshan. She didn't manage to escape in time and was left behind. But no matter what surprised him was the evil spirit's action of protecting. Guqinjun would not do such a thing. His second brother, the 9th young master, would not do such a thing either. But Red Lady would do it and so would Bai Yunxin. And there was the 9th young master. What he said to Long Jiu in the video earlier was the truth. Now he knew that the 9th young master was a very simple demon. If it was him he would also do such a thing. Now that he was on Yunshan he had witnessed so many deaths. Even if one's heart was as hard as iron, it would still be touched. If this kind of thing was told as a story to others, the words hundreds of thousands of lives would only be left in his mind. However, seeing those people and demons dying in front of his eyes, it was another kind of shock. The shock did not come from anything else. It came from above. Although he knew that the so-called celestial beings in this world might not be the gods in the legends of the secular world. But in the unseen world he would always be afraid of some retribution for killing too much. This retribution might not come from a person or a group but from fate? This thought. Li Yunxin blinked her eyes and sucked in a breath of cold air as the thought flashed through her mind. Such a thought actually came from him. Even if one's heart was as hard as iron, it would still be touched. The prerequisite for this kind of thing was to have a heart. But he didn't know when he had slowly developed such a heart, to feel a little uneasy about these deaths, instead of feeling that he should feel uneasy. Chapter 544. It probably started from that night. That night, he ran back to Ziwei Palace from Hongling in Country of Yu. He told Lu Gongzan that he might have been set up. Lu Gongzan said he was overthinking, but he believed it must be true. Someone used a long and big conspiracy to break the Taishang state he was born in. Then he was attacked by the people of Xianmen. This topic was interrupted. At this moment, when he should have been proud of his success, he suddenly thought of this. Because he realized that if he was heartless before, he was heartless now. The first one was heartless. He knew what other people felt and what he should do to cater to other people's feelings. But on the inside, he felt that his heart was as elusive as the clouds high in the sky, and difficult to fathom. In this life, Li Chunfeng gave him the name Li Yunxin, which was a lucky hit. He also knew that he was heartless in his previous life because of a physiological disease. In this life, his body became a normal person, but he knew that there was a soul in this world. So he didn't know whether he was heartless in his previous life because of his body or because he had a heartless soul. Then he met many people and things. Sometimes he would have a situation like, why do I have such a strange feeling? But he wasn't sure whether he had feelings or not. The last ruthless point was love. For example, now. So many monster kings were trapped in the prohibition spell and couldn't get out. The two skeletons were fighting with them and seemed to have the upper hand. He stripped part of the wacken from them and let them fight with the rest, but there was no risk of losing control. In this situation, Li Yunxin, who had just entered the human world, would probably watch them all die. He had an agreement with Shinryu that night. In fact, he could even be considered a member of the True Dragon. Maybe it was because of this that Guqin Jun and Lord Tong Tian couldn't tolerate him. In the end, demons were hard to tame. Now that there were so many Long Sun and Great Demon Kings here, there was no harm in killing them all. However, he still felt that something was wrong. In his previous life, when he saw a few ants crawling in front of him, he would raise his hand and crush them to death one by one, or leave the second and third in the middle. In fact, he did not feel any pleasure from crushing ants to death, nor did he have any special hobbies, nor did he have any special reason. It was just that. It's like you accidentally swinging your hand when you're walking. When I did this, it was nothing. There was no purpose. There is no difference between crushing an ant or killing a dog or a man, and moving a table or taking a couple of steps in the same place. A moment ago they were talking and laughing with you, and the next moment they killed you. In the eyes of such people, there was no contradiction between talking and killing. Or rather, there was no relationship at all. At that time, he would never have felt the way he did now. He felt that he was heartless. In the eyes of many, he was extremely cold and heartless. But being heartless in this world meant that people lacked certain emotions, but others would still exist. So now he did not know if he also had some emotions. Like a solid dam that was slowly leaking water, it would probably bring a terrible result one day. This was really damn it. Before this he took a deep breath and now he sighed. Of course, he would not do that kind of stupid thing. Knowing that he was slowly beginning to have feelings, he was afraid and felt that this thing should not happen, so he forced himself to believe that he was still heartless, and insisted on walking on a certain path. If he was such an awkward and unpleasant person, he would probably have died dozens of times already. He was Li Yunxin. He always knew how to sail according to the wind, and how to adapt to the situation. Since he was sure of this, he knew that heartless people had their own way of living, and people with feelings also had their own way of living. When he was heartless, he could kill all these people and give himself a peaceful world. But now, if he really had some feelings, it would be troublesome if he forced himself to kill them. He would feel uncomfortable in his heart. Maybe in the future this feeling of discomfort would become stronger. Cultivation was about a subtle state of mind, unless he planned to stop practicing painting and only be a demon. Otherwise, it would be very stupid to find trouble for himself. How could he do such a thing? Since that was the case, there was another way. Li Yunxin sighed. Alas. You guys are lucky. I am a soft-hearted person now. Then he suddenly stretched out two fingers, channeled his spiritual power, and pointed at the black and white flowing gold. He had been behind the scenes for so long, now was the time to show off his new clothes. The deduction Li Yunxin made based on the black and white flowing gold was very close to the truth. Now, there were indeed hundreds of great demons fighting with the two skeletons. But it was not what he guessed. The scattered demon kings hiding in the mountains had formed a motley crew. These great fiendish demons were, in fact, subordinates. The nine-dragon sun claimed to rule over 70% of the world's waters. Although it was just a name, for example, the nine dragon suns could only enjoy the incense in a short stretch of Wei River, the actual area of control was still very large. Especially for super great demons like Zither Master and Evil Lord, the area under their control would only be more, not less. Just like what Li Yunxin saw in Hatred's Golden Palace, there were many great demons under the Evil Lord's command. But at least among the 9 sons of the dragons, the Evil Lord's character might be considered relatively benevolent. She vaguely knew that Zither Master and Hatred were plotting something, so she didn't let those great demons advance too far. But she couldn't say it before the battle. The few dragon son had the intention to kill all of them and enjoy their souls. As a result, there were always some arrogant great demons who had a grudge against the celestial sect of wonders who bravely advanced on the array. In the end, there weren't many great demon kings left under her command. But it was still much better than others. Before the two skeletons went straight to Manwan Mountain, she and Bai Yunxin both sensed that there were great demons fighting in the mountains. Then she realized that the surging aura was somewhat familiar. The reason why she only felt it was familiar was that a great demon like Zither Master rarely fought. The last time she saw him fight was almost a few hundred years ago. While she was hesitating, she found that Zither Master's aura suddenly weakened to the point of almost non-existence. At this moment, she knew that one of the two people fighting just now was Zither Master. Both of them had high cultivation levels, no lower than the Xianmen realm. But in the blink of an eye, one of them was defeated by the other. Who else could do this except for Zither Master and herself? But when she thought of this, she also felt the sudden change of aura between heaven and earth. This sudden change of aura also affected her. But after all, her cultivation level was extremely high and she didn't use Taoist spells like the cultivators of Xianmen. Therefore, he still had time to think about other things. If it was Zither Master who fought with someone and defeated that person, then who would be so daring to attack the Dragon Prince at this time? If the one who was defeated was Zither Master, then who had such magical power? This thought turned in her mind and she wanted to find out. She had asked Zither Master to control the two skeletons. But when the aura between heaven and earth changed, the bodies of the two skeletons also began to peel off. All these situations were linked together, so it was difficult to make a clear judgment. Who would have thought that things would change in the future beyond her comprehension? The two skeletons began to run in all directions and began to attack the nearby cultivators as if they were in hot pursuit. It was as if they had lost their demonic powers and wanted to make up for it with the bodies of others. But when the skeletons went to the thousands of cultivators, Evil Master thought that Zither Master wanted to use the hands of the two monsters to completely annihilate the enemy. Then, the skeletons pounced on them. The fierce and evil aura almost locked onto all the great demons in the mountain, including her. Only then did she realize that things were not good. Zither Master and Hatred said that the two things lost control after they were awakened. By now, Zither Master should have tried to control them, but it seemed to be even more terrifying. Maybe Zither Master and the others also fell into a trap. Once this thought came to her mind, she immediately took Bai Yunxin and tried to leave Manwan Mountain. Then she found that they seemed to be trapped by someone. What a sinister and vicious method. They wanted to trap them to death. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.